This story was written by Redditor Rick the Intern, titled, "We Created Rules for a Haunted House That Shouldn't Exist. Now as adults, we found a house matching its description." Part 1. The Rules. The House. We were apartment kids. No neighborhood, no ranch-style houses tucked neatly into a suburb with backyard swing sets and grill-out birthday parties. When we went trick-or-treating, it was always in someone else's neighborhood. Because of that and other reasons I'll get to, we made up a haunted house when we were kids. We gave it rules because Patrick said that rules were important for such things. It was kind of a tradition for us, and it was also something we worked at year-round. Jennifer said that haunted houses, the real ones, never slept. Back then, the four of us in our tight-knit group partially believed in that stuff, even as we drew pictures and sometimes detailed diagrams of the house's floors and added in new rules or tweaked the old ones we had. Always in Greg's sketchbooks that he kept buying under his parents' nose to feed his unfortunate habit of drawing disturbing images. Even though we made it all up, our excited, serious chatter showed how much we wanted to breathe life into it. Now we're adults. Patrick is a real estate agent. Jennifer is in pre-med at university. Greg works in advertising. And I alternate between construction and retail. It was Patrick who found the house between making his rounds as a real estate agent. I think he had been on his way to show off one of the properties he was representing when he spotted the house. He had to come back to it later when he wasn't being tailed by prospective homeowners. A 5-story Victorian with steep gabled roofs, conical tower-like extensions, and large bay windows that were all boarded up. It stuck out like a giant's rotting but elaborate sore thumb among a neighborhood of smaller houses that Patrick had been driving through to get to another neighborhood. The hedges and lawn were wildly overgrown. Kudzu and other vines clung to the house's siding. But it was something on the front porch that clinched it for Patrick. He went looking for it when he came back. To the right of the door, there were 3 large doll heads that had been slashed open and used as pots for plants. Dingy-looking things bearing fruit that was so far rotted that it resembled old shoe leather. We had never decided exactly what would be growing there. Lay propped up and dying in those makeshift doll head pots. He sent us pictures. That got us there as soon as our schedules aligned. Patrick had talked with some of his real estate colleague buddies, connections, and so on, and had gotten what he needed for permission to access the old house. So a few weeks later, there we all were, the 4 of us, standing on the lawn of a house we had sketched up and chatted about for many days as kids in our rooms while our parents had watched TV or played cards in the close confines of our apartment building.
"Well, this is something, isn't it?"
Jennifer said.
"Patrick, I know this is your doing, but wow, you went to some great lengths for this prank. I'm just going to let myself enjoy it because you put in so much effort."
Patrick shoved his hands in the pockets of his sports coat. His eyes were bloodshot. "Is it my doing?" "Yeah," I said. "This would be an extravagant prank, and for what purpose?" I waited for Patrick to answer, but he just stood there staring at the house. I was thankful that I was wearing jeans and not khaki shorts because the front lawn was nearly up to our knees.
"We should go over the rules again,"
Greg said incredibly as he was carrying a sketchbook in his hands.
"Are you insane?"
Jennifer said.
"You can't think that would matter now."
"But what if it does?" Greg said.
"What if it matters now more than it did then?"
"Unbelievable," Jennifer said. "So let's go over the rules again," Patrick said glumly, but he seemed to be trying to peer into the windows despite their being boarded up. Greg opened up the sketchbook he had been carrying.
"Number 1,
he said. "Wait," I said. "Is that one of your sketchbooks from when we were kids?" Greg sneered.
"I wish. I think my parents found the old things and threw them away while we were moving out of the apartment. But I remembered the rules, more or less, because I read through them so often. So I wrote them down again. The language is a little different now because I'm older and, I like to think, wiser. But they should basically be the same." "We read those rules so often," Jennifer said. "Together."
We all faced the house as Greg went through the rules. Here they are. 1. Never knock on the door with your fist. If you want entry to the house, place your right hand on the metal knocker and your left hand over your eyes. If someone is with you, they should be covering their eyes as well. Use the knocker 3 times. 2. Someone will open the door for you. Keep your eyes closed and covered and count to 3. You don't want to see who opened the door for you. After 3 seconds, you can open your eyes and go inside. But know that in doing so, you are entering into an agreement with the entities in the house. It is a simple agreement. You get to go inside, but they get to harm you if you break the rules. By entering the house, you're giving consent. 3. Leave any electronic devices in a cubbyhole in the wall near the front door. You can retrieve them if and when you leave. 4. Walk, but do not run. If you walk, the entities in the house will only walk. If you run, they run, and they will chase after you if you run. They have gotten very fast from chasing people over the years. 5. On each floor, you must solve a puzzle. If you fail the puzzle or flee the puzzle, the entities will come after you. Successfully solving the puzzle will grant you entry to the stairs. 6. If you go up the stairs without solving the puzzle or try to go beyond the next floor, Walt the Stairman will come after you. Walt the Stairman is an entity that spends its time devising ways to torture others with stairs. It has gotten creative over the years from people who have tried to cheat. 7. There is a treasure at the very top of the house in the attic. This is the reason why you are here now and why you are going over the rules again. This is the reason you will go inside and risk your lives. This treasure is worth the risk.
Jeez, Jennifer said. Is that how we wrote it back then?
Greg cleared his throat.
Well, basically, I like to think that my dictation is a little better now than it was back then.
He laughed, but awkwardly.
But we did include that bit about the reason you're here now going over the rules again, Jennifer said. I mean, I do remember the treasure and everything.
How could we forget about the treasure, I said, chasing it with my own nervous laughter.
What I'm saying is, Jennifer went on, seems like we almost expected ourselves to be here now. Going over the rules again? Seems like you may have fudged that part, which makes me think that Greg's in on the prank with Patrick. Bravo, boys. I'm all for it. I don't mind being on the tail end of a prank. If it's going to be entertaining, let's do it.
Wait, I said. Are we sure we want to do this? What if one of us isn't in on it? We never put much into the puzzles themselves, not the details. They could be anything.
You're going to tell me you believe in ghosts?
Jennifer said. We never explicitly said whether it was ghosts, I said. Jennifer tilted her head.
What are you trying to imply? Spirits? Aliens? Scottish house elves in the American Deep South?
Maybe, I said. Or maybe it's just something else. Greg said his sketchbooks disappeared. I just think we should be careful about this.
Guys, Greg said, and gal, don't sweat it. I've been thinking about it ahead of time. I typed up a message to send off to some friends who wouldn't call me wacko after the fact. It will send automatically in the event I'm not back to my phone and deleting it by 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. It will also send them the location of this house. I'm going to leave my phone in the car.
Well, if something happens to us before 3 or before your friends get here, I began. I wonder what the treasure could be, Patrick said, then so low I almost couldn't hear him. Tired of this rat race.
Bravo, Patrick, Jennifer said. Now lead on. It's going to get dark out here soon, and I'd rather get this show on the road while it's still light out. Or show in the house. However you want to put it. We've got puzzles to solve and we've got stairs to climb. Yeah, Pat, Greg said. Just pretend we're some folks looking to buy a nice spooky house. Do your thing.
We went up the front porch.
Its old wood creaked under the collective weight of the four of us. I glanced once at the doll head pots with their dying plants and wondered how long they'd been dying. Whether or not it was all a hoax, I figured they were probably never alive to begin with. We asked each other if we were all ready, butterflies in our stomachs, hearts in our throats. Patrick planted himself at the front, put his right hand on the knocker. He nodded at us. We nodded back. And we all covered our eyes. Part 2. The First Floor. My hand shook over my shut eyes as I waited, as the four of us waited, while Patrick operated the front door's metal knocker. 1, 2, 3 knocks, just like the rules said. While we waited, I was hoping no one would come to the door, that we would all have a laugh there on the front porch as whoever was behind this house from my childhood imaginings made real would come forward at the get-go, that we wouldn't have to go inside not knowing what we would find. Maybe, I hoped, like a child making a wish with a penny at a shopping mall's fountain, it was some rich benefactor who built the house for us at Patrick's request, and had somehow made it look very old on the outside. You know, the good kind of surprise. Instead, I could hear the front door opening. My heart flipped and flopped. I thought I heard breathing, but I couldn't tell if that came from us or whoever had opened the door. 1 Mississippi, Greg was saying out loud. 2 Mississippi. His voice shook. While he was counting, I thought I heard something like slurred words coming from the doorway. Then it began to sound to me more like language in reverse, like when you play a movie or record backwards. 3 Mississippi. All right, Jennifer said, hilarity or fear quaking in her voice as well. I'm now opening my eyes. I opened mine too. There was no one at the door. Patrick rushed in immediately. We followed. The lights were already on. A rough-looking chandelier that I vaguely recognized cast a pale yellow light over the foyer. Patrick's head was swiveling around near the entrance. He thrashed a nearby curtain, a potential hiding place. Whoa, Greg said. Whoever it was moved quickly. Or maybe, Jennifer said, the door moved itself. Now, don't start thinking I'm a believer. It could be some mechanism triggered by the knocker. Patrick, I said, you got some friends with deep pockets? I don't make many friends these days, he said. He was still looking about for whoever had opened the front door for us, checking the closet under the stairs. 3 of my only friends are here with me now, if I can still count you as friends. Sure, Pat, Greg said, flipping through his sketchbook, producing a pencil from his pocket, and either sketching or writing some things down. Look at this place, I said. It's just like we imagined when we were kids. I mean, it's all coming back to me now. This is the foyer. Seems to be to scale. Or close enough, I guess. Those are the stairs that curve just like we drew them. Don't step a foot on the stairs, guys, Patrick said. Here's that little bench I remember drawing beneath the mirror, Jennifer said. She moved over to the right. And the mirror, its wooden frame is engraved with a bunch of snakes chasing their own tails. This was my idea. I'd forgotten about it, but you remembered? How did you get something like this? Well, I said, if this house continues to be even somewhat remotely based on the floor plans and items we put in here as kids, things are going to get kooky. Yeah, Greg said. No kidding. And it had been kids back then, not architects or house decorators that had come up with this place. Kids obeying the kinds of whims and fancies that they had. The only reason we had even known about Victorian-style houses and their designs was from books we had rented from the library to help us along the way. Our primary goal had been to create a scary, dangerous house. That reminded me of something important. We made some traps, I said. Remember? At length, the other 3 said they did. I can't remember all of them, Patrick said. Neither can I, Greg said. We'll help each other, I said. Together, Jennifer said. We can remember a lot more. I'm still amazed that none of us went right back out the door or even talked about doing so. We hadn't started any of the puzzles yet. We hadn't risked our lives yet like the rules said we would by entering. But the threat was there and had begun to magnify as soon as that front door had opened and we'd gone inside. We should have been better prepared. I had no holy water, salt, or silver on me. Not that I think it would have mattered, not that I or my 3 friends believed that kind of stuff anymore. But maybe we wanted to believe in that stuff again.
"Guys," Patrick said, "cubbyhole." It was there to the left of the front door, almost camouflaged with the chip white paint of the walls. It was surprisingly large enough to accommodate quite a few things. 3 of us put our phones in the cubbyhole, Greg having left his in the car.
"Nobody has any fancy spirit detecting equipment, right?" Greg said. "No infrared thingamabobs or anything like that, right? If so, please deposit them in the cubbyhole now." "I seem to have left my proton pack at home," Jennifer said, giving him a wink when I looked at her. "So just cell phones," Greg said after we finished. "Glad we came prepared," he joked. "Heck, I didn't even think to bring a flashlight."
"I checked ahead of time," Patrick said. "Electricity is running to this place. I didn't go inside until now, but I had an idea the lights might be operational."
"Who's paying the electricity bill, Pat?"
Greg said. "I don't know. Wasn't able to find that out." Patrick was already moving beyond the foyer. We followed. We were all still joshing around at this point. Well, except for Patrick, but you could tell our nerves were all on fire with fear. No entities yet to speak of, unless they were invisible. I wasn't sure whether which would be scarier, being able to see them or not being able to see them. We moved about the first floor. The foyer passed by the stairs. Next was the parlor, an old-timey and foreign word to us when we were kids, but one that Jennifer had explained to us back then was like a living room for entertaining guests. It had a more formal air than a family's personal living room, so we had done our best to draw in fancy chairs and cabinets and lights in that room. And there they were. The furnishings were rough despite trying to be fancy. High-backed plush chairs with faded gilding, the cushions falling apart. One large cabinet flared out at the top into a clown's visage, etched in wood. I looked to the right wall of the parlor, noticed the painting on the wall that was a hybrid of Mona Lisa and George Washington, slapdash together with a heavy dose of Salvador Dali melting clock vibes. Only this time, it was the flesh on the face that appeared to be melting off the skull. Greg's doing. It looked good, almost professional. Had Greg been that good of an artist back then? The eyes were hollowed out, all the way into the wall it sat upon. It was the classic haunted house portrait with its eyes hollowed out so someone behind the wall could get a good look at you deal. If there's a technical term for that, I don't know what it is, but I watched the hollowed out eyes closely. Jennifer came up beside me suddenly and I think I may have jumped.
"That's Greg for you,"
she said. We went beyond the parlor and into the dining room, past into the kitchen, and at that point, we were looping back around towards the living room that was connected by a way of hallway back to the foyer and stairs. There was a lot of creepy stuff scattered about. Blood-stained cups in an old china cabinet, dolls that had what were like medical fake human eyes to replace an eye that had been lost, sitting on couches, dishes in the sink that seemed to be covered in bile in mysterious chunks and actually smelled, so bad we were gagging. I don't know about the others, but my biggest scare, at least until we got to the living room, was that nasty thing coming out of the cuckoo clock. Wish I would have forgotten about devising that when we were kids. Probably something Greg had cooked up in that sick little brain of his. It was an alcove in the kitchen above the side table. It leapt out towards me from a crooked, broken little house with a clock on its front. A figurine of a man who was old and disfigured. It was unclear whether he was still alive. His formal but tattered coat flared out behind him in the place of wings. Instead of saying, "Cuckoo, cuckoo," it said, "Leave, leave," in a strange voice. It was the kind of voice that imitated a human's but was in no way human. By this point, we were all getting a little angry. You could tell in our postures and the way our voices began to sound when we made little observations. If one of us was behind all this, it was already too much.
already too far. Then we got to the living room, the last room before the foyer and stairs began, the family's personal space. Traditionally, at least by my understanding, when it came to older houses, it was not the best place for guests. It was there we knew that the first puzzle was supposed to be. Curiously, we hadn't really tried to create the puzzles back then when we were kids, even though we were all intrigued by puzzles. I wondered if, even back then, we had hoped in a dark part of ourselves that someday we might encounter this house in the flesh. Maybe we didn't want to make the actual puzzles back then because we didn't want to know their solutions yet. I wish we had. I wish we knew all the answers before it really began. The living room furnishings were the most ordinary of the rooms we've encountered, and yet in the fireplace, the puzzle, that was the area we had designated for the first puzzle. I remember circling many times around that fireplace and jotting it in myself. First floor puzzle. It almost glowed. Probably it did glow. We drew closer to the fireplace. Instead of a fire in the open firebox, there were heaps of gold coins, amber topases, green emeralds, red rubies, and ominous-looking jewelry. I noticed a pendant of a spiky winged owl or bat with twinkling eyes. "What is?" Jennifer said. "Why is the treasure here? It should be upstairs, at the very end, in the attic." "We don't know what the treasure in the attic is," I said, "and we don't know what that is." "There are blocks of stone missing from the fireplace mantel," Greg observed. Sure enough, there were. Going from left to right, starting from the bottom of the mantel, the first, second, third, 8th, and 13th block were missing, up to the point where the mantel ended and the rest of the masonry began. There were large blocks of rough-hewn stone, like for something constructed in medieval or pre-medieval times. We searched the room for potential clues to the puzzle. A mildewy chaise lounge with golden buttons and a battered couch and armchairs arranged in a loose circle. A side table with an ancient ratty-looking earth globe sitting on top of it, but the globe was caved in to the northeast, Alaska and much of the North Pole lost to a makeshift crater. There was a seashell beside the imperfect globe. An old desk that looked like it had been crafted in the 19th century sitting against the wall. On the desk was an empty off-white envelope and a compass, not the kind of compass for telling which direction you were going in, but the tool with a metal point, hinges, and a pencil that people draw circles with. The drawers in the desk were empty. And the missing blocks in the fireplace mantel mentioned earlier, the first, second, 3rd, 8th, and 13th from the left to right, starting from the bottom of the mantel. The other furnishings and odds and ends, like everything else outside of what was in the fireplace, where the puzzle would be. We had come up with these things as kids. While we're looking over what we thought must be clues, Greg suggested that maybe, just maybe, we had been unconsciously trying to create and solve a puzzle even back then. I do vaguely remember us having left some blocks out of the mantel. Bizarre, almost random little details for kids to come up with. Underneath the chaise lounge chair, Patrick found the blocks of stone that were missing from the mantel. "What do you think, folks?" Greg said. "Do they go back in the mantel?" "It can't be that easy," Jennifer said. At the time, things began to take a drastic turn. Up until then, it had just been the inanimate trappings of the haunted house in there with us. I'd almost forgotten that there might be someone or something else there too. The entities. I don't know exactly how to put this. It was like the air on the edges of the room began to blur or haze up. I can only imagine what was going through Jennifer, Greg, and Patrick's minds, but as for me, I was hoping it was some kind of smoke effect. There were shapes in the haze. Already I could tell they were bigger than us, and they moved strangely in a different rhythm to our walking or shuffling, like there was a weird and elaborate jerk to the right or left between stepping, almost dance-like. Other than that, they seemed to be clothed from head to foot in a fuzzy white material that seemed to have a hint of other colors to it, but I couldn't determine what the other colors were. As they moved towards us slowly from the edges of the room, I pointed at them and shouted as if trying to shout over the smoke or haze that half obscured them. "Did we come up with them?" I shouted. "Did we ever plan out the entities themselves?" "I don't know," Patrick said, his voice firm but much lower than mine. I saw that he had his hand on something in his pocket. I made a mental note to myself that we should probably play What's in My Pockets if we made it to the next floor. Jennifer rubbed the back of her head as if she'd been hit there. Greg was transfixed by the approaching figures, his mouth slack and his eyes glazed over. "We gotta do something," I said, "and quick." "Whatever we do," Patrick said, "we can't run. Remember the rules. They can run if we run." "Solving the puzzle wasn't supposed to be timed," I yelled. I wasn't sure whether I was yelling at those in the haze coming towards us or my friends. It wasn't in the rules. "We changed the rules," Greg said. "We added some, but it's easy to forget. We took out some things too. The 7 we have, the finished product, there are some things that were cut." I cast my sights about the living room, between the clues we had, if they were clues, my friends, and the entities approaching us. I was noticing more details about the entities, like how each seemed to be wearing a mask. They had to be masks. There was no way. Even at the slow rate they were moving, I judged they might be within reaching distance by the time a couple of minutes had passed. There were 7 of them. I ripped my focus from them. It was hard because my mind was struggling to fit them into the context of reality. My fight or flight was confused and berserk. I wanted this to all be a joke, but my instincts said threat. We were fumbling with blocks. "Which ones do we put in?" I said. My heart roared like the fire that in an ordinary house might have been in the firebox of the fireplace instead of a treasure. When I glanced at that treasure again, Patrick must have noticed because he said, "The treasure's a temptation." It was almost a chant. I didn't know if he was talking about the one in the attic or the one in the fireplace before us, but I knew one thing: they were coming. Part 3. The first puzzle solution and the real reason for risking our lives. At the edges of the living room, they were coming. They jerked left or right between stepping slowly but inevitably towards us. About half a dozen tall, weird, white-clad figures ripped from someone else's nightmare. We don't remember designing them, and plopped down in our childhood haunted house made real. The entities were coming for us, and we hadn't even gotten much of a start on the first puzzle. I felt betrayed by the house, betrayed by the rules. We hadn't broken any. At least, I didn't think we had. While the rest of us were fumbling with the stone blocks, making half-formed guesses about which blocks to put back into the fireplace mantle, Jennifer started to pull one out. We stopped what we were doing and gaped. "It was almost right," she said as she removed the 5th block. "The circle and globe clues tried to throw me off, but then I thought about how they were broken and how one of my teachers used to say spirals were like broken circles. That teacher wasn't right. Certain spirals are perfect. I used to draw spirals all the time with my compass. I'd put them on my parents' old envelopes, anything I could get my hands on, even the pages of Greg's sketchbooks. They appear in nature in things like seashells and flowers and the best kinds of spiral, the most perfect kind. It's one of the reasons I got interested in science early on. The perfect spiral is golden, called the golden spiral when someone tries to reproduce it, golden like a treasure. In mathematics, this kind of spiral can be represented in something called the Fibonacci sequence. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 8th, and 13th, and now 5th. That was the missing number. Makes up the beginning of the sequence, not counting 0 and the repeated numbers. As she was talking, something in the fireplace clicked. Then there was a stony sliding sound. The bottom of the firebox fell out, and the treasure, gold coins, rubies, topazes, and everything plummeted. Its echoing clatter rose up a moment later. She dropped the 5th block of stone on the floor where the others had been deposited by us. "Great," I said, "but they're still coming." The entity nearest me was about 9 feet away by now. It continued walking very slowly in its almost rhythmic stride, broken by the jerk to the left or right. And because it was this close, and even though it was still blurred by the haze that followed them like their own private atmosphere, I can tell that its legs were not like ours. They were angled in and then angled sharply out. Maybe that's why it walked the funny way it did. The rest of its body was very large and equally strange in arrangement. Over its body were thick, fuzzy, somewhere between wool and fur garments of white, almost like robes with extra colors I couldn't pin down. As for its face or head that I started to lose hope was just elaborately masked. It was like its own organism. As it got closer to me, that face thing stood up. Actually stood up from a curled position. Other than two round eyes with no irises, it was like the face thing had been sleeping on the mound of body we might normally call a neck. As it got up, it revealed its own brighter torso and face. The round eyes never shifted while the rest of it did. The face thing's lower legs were fused to the larger body. Layers of sickly but tightly packed muscles were on the face thing. When the arms on the face thing raised and turned over, I saw rows of jagged teeth on them. The larger limbs of its larger body began to raise themselves too as it got closer to me. Hands, but wider and rounder, opened with more than 5 fingers. Like it was 2 organisms, maybe more beneath the robes. "No!" Greg shouted. I turned and beheld Greg speed walking into Patrick. Patrick had a handgun, probably I thought what he had been gripping in his pocket, and it was aimed at one of the entities. The gun fired, but it missed its mark as Greg pushed Patrick over. When Greg got back up, he had the weapon, and the already queasy feeling in my stomach intensified. Then Greg walked more quickly than I thought him capable of, twisting between 2 entities, the gun in one hand and his newer sketchbook in the other, just missing getting snagged by a larger strange arm, and continued on towards the back of the room. The entities were on his tail. They had turned from us. They picked up their pace as they pursued Greg, but they weren't running like the rules warned they would if we did. Not yet. It seemed speed walking was fair game. Greg opened the door to the hallway leading back to the foyer and stairs. "I'll toss it in the cubbyhole," Greg yelled as he walked rapidly out of the room. "If that doesn't do it, and I don't make it, tell my wife and my daughter." At that moment, he had decided to slam the door behind him. Did the entities open the door like you or I would? If so, I did not hear or see it. I saw the haze around them thicken, blurred to the point that they were fully obscured. Then they were gone. "It wasn't electric," Patrick growled beside me. "The gun, it's mechanical, not electric. No violation of rule number 3. "You don't have a laser or flashlight or anything on it, do you?" I said. "No. It's a standard semi-automatic handgun with no extra bells or whistles." "How about a GPS tracker?" Jennifer said. "Ah," Patrick said. I could see his jaw grinding back and forth. "Oh yeah, I forgot I had one attached. Somebody at the store recommended it. Clerk yammered on about getting it ringed up for me and I was trying to get out of there. The thing is inconspicuous. I guess that's the point, so a would-be thief doesn't see it." He told us he was sorry, that he brought that gun to protect us, that he didn't know why Greg would not let him shoot one of those entities. "What if," I said, and bear with me here, what if those entities are just people in costumes with animatronics or puppetry? Expensive, sure, and surrounded by some impressive smoke and mirror stuff. And imagine, if you would, that Greg's the one who set it up. Like, maybe he's the one with some rich connections and doesn't want us to kill an actual person while they're just attempting nothing more than a prank. "Not long ago," Patrick said, "you were all accusing me of arranging this, which is crazy. We did this together." "Guess it doesn't matter," I said. "We gotta leave. Things are way out of hand." "We can't leave without trying," Jennifer said to me. "You know that. I think about a treasure that's worth risking our lives for." She was right. She was absolutely right. 5 floors, 5 of us, not 4. 5. We had not talked about Sally aloud since we'd gotten here, but she was on our minds. The only reason I haven't mentioned her yet
was because I was waiting for the right moment. It had been Sally's idea to design this haunted house when we were young. I mentioned earlier that our main goal in making up this place and its rules when we were kids was to design a scary, dangerous house, and that it was due to our being cooped up apartment brats wanting to conjure up a house all our own. That's how it started. But then, somewhere along the way, our friend Sally, who had helped us start designing the house, disappeared. Some had said she'd been abducted, others that she just had wandered out of the apartment complex and gotten lost. There were extensive searches. There were countless vigils. We believed then, because of something we had done, that it was the house that had taken her, so as kids, we'd finished planning out the house and its rules after she was gone, because we wanted her back. We never openly said aloud that we thought finishing this idea that had started with her would bring her back, but it was there with us in the place that Sally used to sit. When she didn't come back, there was unspoken guilt. We tried again and again to fix the house and its rules. We made changes. We did everything short of building the house ourselves, which we might have done if we only had the resources. But we were kids. We gave up, because we didn't think there was anything else we could do. Jennifer still calls Sally's parents every year. I don't. I don't think I ever did. When someone goes away and you can't wrap your head around it, eventually you might start to forget. Not forget them, but forget their reality. You live with the memory of them like it's a story your parents used to read to you before bed. Sally's the treasure in the attic, I said.
Yeah, Jennifer said. If this isn't fake, so we should go through with it either way.
That's what Sally would have wanted, I said. She loved this stuff, probably more than Greg and the rest of us. Patrick was turned away facing one of the boarded-up windows. I wanted to turn him around and ask him point blank which treasure he would prefer, our lost friend or one like the gold and jewels that had just been under our noses. I also didn't want to ask him. Not long after that, Greg returned to the living room. He made some joke about how folks like to jazz up their guns with electronics nowadays. He'd banked on that as soon as he seen Patrick pull his weapon like the po-po on a perp. He clapped a hand on Jennifer's back and congratulated her for solving the puzzle, his other hand still gripping his sketchbook. Despite looking a little green in the face, he seemed alright, like those entities hadn't gotten their weird little and weird big hands on him while he'd been depositing Patrick's gun in the cubbyhole near the entrance. He asked us why we were so downtrodden after solving the first puzzle. Patrick gave him an earful about knocking him over, said he owed him one. When we said we had been talking about Sally, Greg looked more shaken than I'd seen him since we had entered the house. Sally's disappearance has always affected him, actually. Maybe even more than the rest of us. We talked about how things would only get harder and crazier, as if we had known when we were designing it as kids that we'd get this chance and that it took that much to get our friend back. Then we went over to the stairs and prepared ourselves for the second floor. Part 4. The second floor. We were on the stairs, going up. The curvature of the stairs reminded me of the curled up head of the entity I'd seen up close downstairs. A head had uncurled itself as a body would then stand up on a larger body walking beneath it. I couldn't get my own head around those entities that had come out on the first floor while we had been trying to solve the first puzzle. They'd come for us because Patrick had broken house rule number 3 about depositing electronics in the cubbyhole near the entrance. The entity's appearance had been difficult for me to navigate mentally. I'm afraid that difficulty has influenced how I try to put words to them. How do you describe something that has little relation to things you've seen before? Without the powers of comparison that we ordinarily have, I feel lost. If one of the 4 or 5 of us had designed these entities, I didn't know where the idea had come from. Maybe they'd been born from some of Greg's bizarre little doodles, and maybe he'd been running a high fever then. Maybe we'd forgotten about those particular details. To try this again, what I'd seen was at least 2 separate things, separate entities maybe, fused together. A body and a face or head was its own body with its own limbs. They were clothed in whitish fuzzy robes. Well, the larger lower body was. The limbs of the larger body in particular were off, angled like a toy whose arms and legs had been snatched out by a child and then put back in the wrong way. And then there was that walking they had that was rhythmic but broken, a staccato little dance step walk that got under your skin, like a bad waltz, like strange toes stomping on your feet. Waltzes and the entities pulled me over into a lane of thinking I was trying to avoid while on the stairs. Walt. I don't see Walt the Stairman, I said. That's a relief.
The entities will probably only appear when we've been bad, Jennifer said. When we break a rule, as long as...
Cue Walt the Stairman. The rest of what Jennifer said was lost to the napalm of fear in my brain. I glimpsed an image of a large shape above the stairs hanging there. It had much longer limbs than I thought those other entities had. Its limbs were touching the walls, holding it up. It made an arc above our heads, rounder eyes than was normal looked down upon me, a hint of blur at its edges. Then it was gone. You guys see that? I said. My breath was coming out ragged. I was sure that at any moment I might throw up. Didn't want to do it on the stairs because that might add an unnecessary slipping hazard. Save that for later. We were at the second floor landing by then, so we stopped to discuss it. They told me they hadn't seen the entity dangling above us, Walt the Stairman, the entity whose job, according to the rules we made when children, was to watch over the stairs so that people didn't go up before solving the floor puzzle. Was Walt making a point, or was what I'd seen been a trick of my mind? Was it both? But the longer we were at the second floor landing, the more we knew we had to get started. Not on the puzzle. That would come later, but too soon for comfort. First, we had to face what we knew would be a potentially dangerous floor. As kids, we designed the first floor as a warm-up, scary but not dangerous. At least not until you go to that puzzle. Unless you tried to solve the first puzzle or broke one of the rules, you wouldn't be risking anything down there. Not so with the second floor. I was the one who stepped first on the second floor vestibule. Click. Onto a pressure plate. Shoot, I said. The traps. A hand grabbed my shoulder from behind me. It's all right, Greg said. That's just to get whoever's going through the house ready for the other traps, remember? I do, Jennifer said. The first trap we made comes after this. Okay, I said. Sure, I recall it, but it's a little hazy. To my right, motion. There was an old record player on a stand against the wall, just like we had put into our sketchbook designs years ago. It had a big gaudy horn on it. It's the kind of record player that I believe is called a phonograph. The record was spinning. Its needle apparatus was moving. When the needle dropped onto the record, it played as a 1910s or 1920s ragtime number. At that point, the needle rose and fell again. Too hard, I thought. The song went in reverse. I was reminded of that sound I heard at the front doorway before going into the house, with our eyes closed and our hands covering them, as the rules had instructed, when we'd been waiting for whatever had opened the door for us to move away. When the song began playing again, the voice was a much deeper, almost demonic tone. It got garbled, went into some lines about melody, and then stopped playing altogether. By that time, I had moved well off that pressure plate, and the others were standing with me in the vestibule. My heart was hammering in my chest. It's not the same song, I said. It's not the one we decided should be played when someone steps on that plate. Yeah, Jennifer said. Which is kind of ironic considering the lyrics. I don't remember what the other song was, Patrick said. It was old, too. Something about a person driving someone else crazy. I don't remember it either, Greg said. But it wasn't this, Patrick said. The vestibule also had paintings of flowers in various states of decay. That was right. That was the way it should be. The way we had intended. What was also right were the two doors at the end of the little entry hall to the second floor. We walked over to them, a door with a hook,
and a door with a fish on their fronts. "And here's the first trap," Jennifer said. "It's the... Which door is it again?" "This is me," Patrick said. "We're the fish, so we'll go through the fish door. I remember it because it was my idea." "No," Greg said, as we were moving in that direction. "It's the hook. We changed that, remember? In order to beat this house, you have to be a hook, not a fish." I took a deep breath. "Are you sure, Greg?" "No, I'm right," Patrick said. "I'm sure. We didn't change that. That was mine. I would know." Greg and Patrick were having a staring contest. "We're the fish," Patrick said to him. Greg shook his head. "You better be sure than I am. I don't think you are." I was already moving towards the door with the fish on it. I kind of just wanted to end their argument. Besides that, I had a plan. I'd just have to have the others stand far back and hide myself behind into the side of the door as I pulled it open, thus evading the trap if it was the wrong door. So I grabbed the handle of Patrick's fish door. "All right, everybody," I said. "Stand back. Get closer to the stairs. I'll just move aside and backwards as I open the door." After they reluctantly moved away, I yanked open Patrick's fish door. I got to the side as I said I would, and I braced myself. Nothing happened. "Are we good?" I said. I was relying on my friend's better vantage point into the doorway from farther back. The others gave me the all clear. So I went around the side of the door, peered into the next room myself. It was a second-story drawing room for entertaining guests, just as we'd planned. Then I turned around to face them. "Success," I said. Greg was nearly on top of me already with that speed walk of his. He raised an arm, and I was sure I was going to get slugged, but not sure why. Instead, he grabbed the front of my shirt and pulled me back. The twang of a large spring and a whoosh of air chased after me. Then I was on the ground, scooting away on my backside as shards of filthy glass fell into my jeans. Standing above me was a mannequin dressed like a butler. "Refreshments," it said in a recorded voice. It was carrying a full tray of grimy shards of glass. If I hadn't gotten out of the way, some of them might have cut me up. We planned on that butler coming out of the wrong door to the drawing room. It was a spring-loaded mannequin bearing painful and potentially devastating little threats for the unfortunate person who opened the wrong door. I had opened that door. "Thanks, Greg," I said. I shook pieces of glass off of me as I stood up. I really owe you one. I couldn't meet Patrick's eyes. Didn't know what to say to him. I felt bad for him. I was just appreciative that I wasn't having to worry about bleeding or infection. "That thing must have come around the corner," I said. "Did we intend it that way?" No one answered the question, but they were happy I was all right. We passed into the drawing room and from there a study. There were some plenty unsettling things in those rooms. I don't know how we devised a lot of that stuff as kids. Where it came from. Keeping with the mannequin theme, in both the drawing room and study were a bunch of mannequins seated and standing in a variety of postures. Some were missing their limbs or their heads. One held another's head in its hands. A mannequin seated at the table had a book open to pages detailing an Iron Maiden, the Iron Maiden's chest cavity open and displaying its rib-like spikes, and another torture device that swung people while they were upside down. I recalled those being foreshadowing for future traps. Like I said, not sure where we'd gotten a lot of those concepts as kids. Then we were at the library. We had an idea of what to expect. Sometimes, ideas aren't nearly enough to get you ready. Jennifer opened the door, and we all peeked in. We started to hold the wall. A couple of us were gripping the door like it was a branch on a cliffside. Even though we felt we were on level ground, a moment earlier, once that door was open, our perspective changed. The wooden door of the library sloped down at a very sharp angle. Beyond, towards the back of the room, there was a pit. It looked to be roughly 10 feet in depth, with a width that went across the entire room. Against the back walls, massive bookshelves leaned over the pit, secured in place by things that even with my experience in industrial and commercial building construction, I had no idea could exist. Unless they had been made of metal and welded in place or secured with hidden bracing. In other words,
Those bookshelves and their books should have fallen into that pit. They were that big. It didn't make sense how tall the room was and how deep the pit seemed to be. The library should have been directly over the kitchen and some of the other first-floor rooms, which had no indication of a pit. But we had designed this library that way as kids, so here it was. Slapping us in the face metaphorically was this fictitious banner we'd made to stretch across much of the room. It was the kind of banner you might see presenting a library's book fair. We used to love book fairs, when the library got brand new books just released, and you had the nice smelling catalogs to get you ready for when the day or days come and you could go into the library and pick up the cool new books you ordered. Anyway, instead of book fair, the banner read, "Knowledge is slippery." We'd laugh about it then, though we were clever. Didn't feel that way now. I mentioned earlier that we should have been better prepared. File that under the understatement category. We had no mountain climbing gear with us, which is probably what we needed to get across the steeply sloped flooring of the library and to the door on the right side of the room. Here's what we did do to get across the library. We held hands and we lowered ourselves on the angled floor like we made a rope of ourselves. Greg had to shove his new sketchbook beneath his pants belt. The person or people at the front looked for things against or near the front wall of the library to grasp with their free hand. Those at the back held onto what they already found. We used our leg strength and the bond of our hands. We used niches or grooves in the floorboard, baseboards that tried to break off in our grip, a desk that was heavy, but not so heavy it didn't slide a little if pulled too much. We used trust. It was hard. I think it would have been easier with 5 people, with Sally, but the 4 of us made it across from the left to the right side of the room. The pit had been dark, whispering promises, things to come, but we hadn't fallen in. After the library, we were looping back around towards the stairs. We knew that this time we'd have to solve a puzzle before a path would open back up to the stairway. If we wanted to go back, it would have had to have been back through the library. A hall from the library bisected 3 rooms, or chambers as we labeled them. They were identical in size, so we couldn't remember which one had the puzzle. We opened the doors to the first 2, even though we figured the puzzle was probably in the last one. The sights in those first 2 rooms were revolting. Bones littered on the floor of the first one, what looked to be real animal bones, or at least very good replicas. In the next room, the same exact bones were in the same exact positions. We checked multiple times, despite some of us gagging at the sight and smell of the second room in particular. But they had more meat on them, like time had been wound back. Flies were buzzing around the bones with meat on them, actual living flies. I knew they were alive because I swatted one to make sure it wasn't some special effect. I beheld its twitching, crumpled body in my palm. This was important. Flies might seem like a small detail, but other than the entities, this was the first time we'd encountered something in the house that might actually be alive. It would not be the last. In the final room of the hallway, we expected the second floor puzzle. Inside, in the middle of the room, was a circular staircase leading up. There was a trap door above it. "Huh?" Patrick said. "This isn't right," I said. "There are no other stairs in the house. There shouldn't be." "We can't go up these stairs either until we've solved the puzzle," Patrick said. "Rule number 6. Walt the Stairman will come for us if we climb the stairs before solving the puzzle." "Guys," Jennifer said, "this is the puzzle. We don't remember another staircase being in the house because we didn't put one in. But we also never decided on what the puzzles should be. They could be anything, including the staircase." "That's right," Greg said. "The puzzle was supposed to be in the center of one of these rooms, and voila, the center of the room." "We should brainstorm a little here," Jennifer said, "since we've got time." She glanced up at the clocks against the walls. You could hear them ticking in unison like the marching of an army. There had to be at least a dozen of them, looked to be half on one wall and half on the opposite. They were all plain white plastic analog clocks. "The first floor puzzle," she said, "was related to me. There were 5 of us. 5 floors, 5 puzzles. I'm guessing that each puzzle is related to one of us. So the question burning in the front and back of my mind is, who here has a thing for stairs?"
Other than Walt? Greg said, laughing harshly. We gave him sour looks. I used to like those, Patrick began. What are they called? Impossible staircases? You know, the ones that are represented in art and seem to go on forever. It's like they descend and go around, and then they're ascending back to where they begin. They're called Penrose stairs, Greg said. His arms were folded and he was sitting on the only bed in the room. What? I consider myself something of un artiste, you know, before I lost my innocence to working on medical cream and potato chip advertisements. So right now, I said, what we have is possible stairs. Maybe we gotta turn them into impossible stairs. Let's do that, Jennifer said, until we come up with something better. Greg looked up, still sitting on the bed. Hey, sounds good to me. Unless we fail because it's the wrong way to go about it. Or maybe it's right. I don't know. Guess we're on our way to finding out. All right, Patrick said. Sounds like a decent start. Make the possible stairs impossible. Wish we had an axe or a hammer in here. Yeah, I said. We could go to work on these stairs. We searched the room for other potential clues on the second floor puzzle. There wasn't much in the room, but we had to be thorough. Here are all the clues we gathered. An early 20th or 19th century looking circular staircase in the middle of the room. It went up to a closed trap door. The staircase had 14 total stairs. A bed with plain white sheets and a comforter. There was a shoe print on the left and right pillow going in opposite directions. A compact extension ladder under the bed that upon fully opening could reach the top step of the staircase. 14 clocks, analog clocks with the hands. 7 were on the left wall and 7 were on the right wall. Upon closer inspection, they seemed to be scuffed up as if someone had stepped on them. But the strangest thing was that the clocks on the right wall were actually running counterclockwise. That was it. Once again, I found myself amazed that as children, we had come up with clues for a puzzle that years ago we had seemed to have no inkling of. And now, here we were trying to solve it with those clues years later. At this point, we didn't have the entities moving towards us because we hadn't broken a rule, not like with the first floor puzzle. However, I think we all felt the pressure of time on our shoulders. Oppressive. Maybe it was the ticking of all those clocks, or how the stairs at the center of the room beckoned to us. Part 5. The second puzzle's solution. We had been discussing the clues in the room with the second floor puzzle for a while. The clocks, the pillows with the shoe prints on them, the ladder, and the circular stairway itself. A couple of times we even wandered back to the rooms with the bones and the meteor bones in them, and the flies. Did we do it for inspiration? To remind us that we also had bones that might look like that in the future? You know, I said at one point when they were all in the puzzle room, I was wrong. We already have impossible stairs in front of us. They're not Penrose stairs, but they're just as impossible because we can't climb them. Rule number 6 forbids going up the stairs without solving the floor puzzle. Patrick is right. I don't think we should even try it. Then we fold? Greg said. We just give up? That's not what I meant, I said. Maybe we're not supposed to climb them, Patrick said. If we take the clocks off the wall and put them on the stairs, one on each stair because there are 14 of each, maybe just placing them there completes the puzzle. I believe we are meant to climb them, Jennifer said. That might be what the scuff marks on the clocks and the shoe prints on the pillows are telling us. But Patrick, I think you're onto something. Because if we put the clocks on the stairs, there are 14 stairs and 14 clocks. And then we walk on them. We wouldn't be violating rule number 6. We'd still be going up the stairs though, I said. Would we? Jennifer said. Or would we be going up the clocks? Ugh, Patrick said, when he ran a hand through his hair and looked like he might pull some out. Semantics. But the more we talked about it, the more it made sense to us. There were still 2 other clues, the 7 clocks running in reverse and the ladder that we weren't factoring in. But we figured they all related to that solution without us realizing it. Jennifer had pointed out that for one of the clues for the puzzles downstairs, the 19th century desk, she'd only thought about its connection after the fact. That desk had been made in the same century as the Fibonacci sequence had been coined. So we decided, and we started putting clocks down on stairs. We even used the ladder, even though someone could have just put those clocks down as they went along while being handed the clocks up from below. But maybe that was what the ladder was for, so we could put the clocks there ahead of time. Time. It was ever on our minds, and the march of 14 clocks ticking in unison from the walls to the stairs wasn't much help. Jennifer volunteered to walk up on those clocks because she was the lightest and said she had a decent enough balance. She said she'd been pretty darn good on the balance beam once upon a time. I think Patrick, or I in particular, might have slid off the flimsy-looking clock face coverings if we didn't break them. They were light plastic, circular, and easy enough to take off the walls. We placed each of the normal clocks on each of the first 7 stairs, and then we put the strange counterclockwise running clocks on the last 7 stairs. Our reasoning was that time had to run forward before it could run in reverse. Then Jennifer went up the circular staircase at the center of the room. She did it by stepping on the clock on each stair. We held our breath. We reminded her not to touch the railing with her hands. I don't envy her. A few times she wobbled and nearly grazed the railing. At the last stair, she waited a moment. I think we were all waiting for some sound or movement like when the first floor puzzle had been solved. Then she tried the trap door. No dice. It would not budge. We did hear something, though. Footsteps from down the hallway. Strange, inhuman. I'd say hoof-like, but that might be a little misleading. I remembered them from downstairs, even though I hadn't been paying much attention to what they had sounded like while approaching. There was the staccato, almost dance-like rhythm, and there was more than one set. Their movement competed with the ticking of the clocks. The entities, they were approaching from the end of the hallway. We had failed the puzzle. Jennifer's expression when she looked down from the top stair, her hand still on the trapdoor latch, reminded me of the expression on that person in Edvard Munch's The Scream. I'm not much for paintings myself. That might be Greg's domain, I suppose. But I knew that one well enough, and I knew I felt the way Jennifer looked with her eyes wide and her mouth hanging. We have to escape them, I said.
We just broke rule number 5, Greg said. It states that you must solve the floor puzzle. If you fail, the entities will come for you.
Yeah, but, Patrick said, I broke rule number 3 and we're still here.
Right, Jennifer said. We're still here.
Jennifer, Patrick said. I saw a face light up, a candle in the darkness of my dread. But the entities were approaching, seemed like they were already passing the first room. Slow, but inevitable. The strange dance rhythm was like a predator toying with its food. Patrick grabbed the compact extension ladder and set it up once more against the curving side of the stairway. Jennifer, he said, can you walk back down on the clocks and then get ready to go back up again? Can you do it again?
Sure, but
I'll explain later. No time. Trust me. For myself, as I watched, feeling rather powerless, I was already worrying about a repeat of the fish door incident. Patrick had seemed so certain about which door the trap was behind.
Leap of faith, Greg said. You'll either make a believer or a bleeder out of me, Pat.
From the ladder, Patrick got up on the last stair at the top, nearest the trap door. He waited for Jennifer to move back to the bottom of the stairway. Okay, Patrick said. Let's use the ticking of the clocks as our beat. We'll step at the same time for each second-hand tick. Each second. Together, I'll go down at exactly the same time as you go up. Then you try the trap door. Patrick, I said, I'd realizing something. You're not standing on a clock. I know, he said. I don't need to. The rules don't say anything about going downstairs before you solve the floor puzzle. They got ready. We all counted to 3 aloud as we had before entering the house. Tick. Patrick stepped down while Jennifer stepped up on a clock. Tick. Jennifer stepped up on a clock wobbling while Patrick stepped down on the next stair. Down and up at the same time. Like those shoe prints on the pillowcases facing the opposite directions. Like 2 sets of clocks moving in opposite directions. I'd been looking back and forth between them in the doorway and saw a strange hand, big and wide and with more than 5 fingers reach around the opening. Unlike the living room downstairs, this was a pretty small chamber, If they got in here with us, it might be over before it began. When Patrick had gotten to the bottom of the stairway and Jennifer was at the very top, she tried the trapdoor again. It took a moment to realize that the trapdoor had opened. When I glanced back to the doorway, that hand I'd seen was gone. Gone too were the sounds of their approach. Air rushed out of my lungs. "The thing about those impossible stairs from art," Patrick said, "what makes them a paradox, is because they ascend and descend at the same time. They appear to be going down, but then you realize you've actually been going up. Impossible." "They're doing both," Jennifer said. "Like time moving forward and backwards at once." "Like the clocks," Greg said. Then we realized that no secret passage had opened up for us going back to the main stairs. It had to be what was beyond the now open trap door. So the rest of us went up the circular staircase. We'd figured we'd be all right now, not in violation of Rule 6 because we'd solved the floor's puzzle. Above the trap door was a dark, narrow hallway. We went down that hallway. A couple of times one of us mentioned something moving in there with us, but it could have been our imaginations. We located another trap door down that passageway by noticing an outline of a thin square of light. When we opened it up, we found ourselves above the second floor vestibule near the main stairs where we had begun. We jumped down, and we got ready for the third floor. Part 6. The Third Floor. Up we went. This time I did my best not to think about Walt the Stairman while on the stairs. I certainly didn't speak of him. I didn't want a repeat of the earlier incident when I'd gotten a nasty glimpse of that particular entity. On the third floor antechamber, there were pairings of gears and other mechanical things. Their frames and glass coverings were an off-red hue, as if they'd been dipped in blood and then set out to dry. There was a bench you didn't want to sit on because of thin nails sticking out. Beside the bench was a flower pot. Instead of flowers, a fake arm and leg, the kind amputees might wear, jutted above the rim. This time, there was just one door, and even though that door wasn't set with a trap, I dreaded that room more than I dreaded any other room we've encountered yet. This was the room I might have had the biggest influence on. We opened the door and went inside. Dim ochre lights displayed a room full of fish tanks, small to very large. Though the water in each tank was murky, they were lit up so well that we got a good view of their contents. There weren't any fish inside them. Instead, there were metal beams and bracing gears, rubber belts, cords, and metal parts so twisted that their original purposes were unclear. There was a decapitated head of an animatronic squirrel character of a family entertainment center, some local knockoff Chuck E. Cheese type establishment that we used to go to but was now defunct. Rust and grime caked these objects. Since childhood, I've had a fear of submerged mechanical things. I didn't find out until later that there was an actual phobia for that. Submechanophobia, the fear of underwater man-made objects. This room had been an attempt to make my friends understand, to make them understand a certain fear of mine, because they had laughed at me, unable to comprehend how machines underwater could be a whole lot scarier than above it. It did not bring me any joy whatsoever to find that upon looking at the contents of this room, the design made real, my friends finally got it. I wish I hadn't been trying to prove a point back then. We knew there was a trap in there, under the floorboard, but we couldn't determine where it was. We had to step carefully. We gravitated towards the submerged head of that squirrel character animatron. His name had been Singin' Squirrel, and the family entertainment center he belonged to was called Singin' Squirrel and the Gang. As I said, a local Chuck E. Cheese knockoff that we had in our hometown and was now defunct. Why did we all go over to that particular tank? Because it had started to move. When we got closer, we could see the nose and other plastic parts of the face had started to wear away, revealing the bone and nerve-like machinery behind it. It was all swollen, as if what was inside couldn't wait to get out of that worn plastic skin. It was moving.
"Welcome, kids,"
it said. The animatron's voice was distorted and muffled from being submerged. When its jaws moved, bubbles went up and popped to the surface of the tarnished water. Its tank gave off a smell like rotten bologna and blood.
"Banjo Bear and Fiddler Bear were just asking about you."
Holy, Patrick was saying as he stepped beside me. The flooring beneath Patrick broke. I grabbed him and pushed. Where the wood had been weak, something we had not been able to detect, there was another open tank just below. It, too, was lit up so we could see the metal contraption down there. It was an open bear trap. It was as rusted and foul-looking as everything else in those other tanks.
It's been a long time since we've seen you.
Singing Squirrel continued in his characteristic southern drawl. He segued from that to a song, but then he got caught in the word long, repeating it over and over until it slowed down and got very deep. Like that old record player downstairs, it started to sound demonic before it faded. Singing Squirrel's mouth remained open. Speaking of the record player on the second floor in this incident, and how they had both slowed and got demonic sounding, those were details we had left out as kids. We were beginning to find that for the things we left a little vague in Greg's sketchbooks, the house would fill in the details for us, and we were not fans of the choices it was making, at least not when we had to encounter them in person. Patrick thanked me for pushing him out of the way of that tank-submerged bear trap beneath the flooring, and they comforted me, and I think themselves, about my fears of underwater machinery. The next room was the laboratory. In our designs, we decked it out with all kinds of vials and canisters of liquids, steaming vats, hoses that pump things here and there, forceps, spatulas, and other utensils, and ancient-looking machines that sparked electrical current and spit fire. What we saw in there, it seemed to be a pretty faithful representation of what we put in Greg's sketchbook all those years ago. Except, here's one reason why I just mentioned how when we left out details, the house took certain liberties to try to fill in those details. We had put a Frankenstein's monster in that room, strapped him down to a gurney. But we had only drawn in a vague shape and written the words, like Frankenstein's monster. When we got closer to that thing on the gurney, and we had to because we put it in front of the door at the end of the room, we could see all the details that the house had filled in for us. Its face and body were scorched and bloody, riddled with indentations and evidence of parts being fused on. But the kicker? It had pieces of each of us. 5 patches of face for the 5 of us, including Sally. 5 different assortments completed the patchwork of its body, but the face and body were made of the adult us. Sally's long blonde hair on the right part of its head and the right green eye of the thing gave us patches, glimpses of what Sally might look like if she were still around today. It seemed to be unliving, but when we began to pass over the patchwork creature, it came alive. It groaned. Its right hand snatched Patrick's wrist about the same time. He'd gotten too close. It was still strapped down to the gurney, but it took a lot for the 4 of us to get Patrick free. The strength of that thing, of only its right hand, was unreal. The right side of its crooked mouth frothed and drooled. Tears wet its eyes. It was all of us. It was none of us. When we left that room, I felt, and I think the others probably felt it too, that we left pieces of ourselves behind. Next was a dimly lit hallway looping us back around in the direction of the stairs. Light was focused beyond where we knew there was a pit that we had to cross. But Patrick stopped and slumped down against the wall. He sat there with his arms over his knees and his head bent low. I went over to him. "Don't think I can do this, man," Patrick said. "I think this is where I turn back." "You got us in here, buddy," I said to him. "We owe you enough for that, but we might need you for the long haul. Think about Sally." "Sally isn't the treasure," he snapped. By this time, Jennifer and Greg were next to us. "Sally's gone," Patrick said. "She's been gone for a long time, and she's not coming back. And as for the treasure, for all we know, it's some monkey's paw garbage that we're going to regret getting, if we even have a shot of getting it. I'm sorry. I'm out." "We have to try," Jennifer said. "If it's us against this house, we need everybody we can get. Bonus points if they happen to be the childhood best friends who helped design it." "That's right," Greg said. He looked like he was on the verge of a bigger breakdown than Patrick was having. He grinned through it, though, I think for Patrick's sake. "Besides, Pat, you still got some questions about the property. It wouldn't look good to your real estate pals if you left us here without answering them."
Well, Patrick said. He stood up and roused himself with an ironic chuckle. Guess the only way to answer those questions is to continue. That's the spirit, I said, patting him on the back. I knew you took your job more seriously than I do. Let's go, Jennifer said. You silly deranged kids. Another pit was before us, but we could actually see the bottom of this one, unlike the second-floor library. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. At its bottom were long spikes of bamboo filled with chicken excrement. How did we know what they were filled with? Well, because that's what we had written into our sketchbook designs. Filled with chicken poo. You would have had to jump 40 feet to cross that pit, but there were ropes you could swing across with. There were a bunch. They were taut, though, and fixed to stakes in the ground. You had to trigger those traps to get access to the ropes. Leg snare traps, like the ones in the movies that catch their victims or prey in a leg noose and then pull them up in the air, leaving them dangling by their feet. We had to knock over one of those stakes without getting caught in the loop of rope surrounding it. But the closer we got, the more we realized why we had put so many leg snares into our designs. To make it more dangerous, to make it harder. But trying to knock over one, you might inadvertently knock over another stake and get caught in its trap. That's what happened to me. It was no fault of mine or my friends. Before then, we had been able to use all of us to our advantage, as when we got across the library. Now, because the hallway was relatively narrow and there were so many stakes, there just wasn't enough room. We got bunched up and someone accidentally elbowed me. Out of instinct, I moved away. That's when the back of my shoe struck a wooden stake. The leg snare trap triggered and the rope tightened and brutally swung me up and over. Already I felt sick. The dim room spinning around me like I was on a poorly designed fair ride. My stomach not knowing whether to drop or to rise. My right ankle felt like it was being torn off. But even once I was upside down dangling, blood rushing to my head. That wasn't the end of it. Something clicked above me and began to swing me back and forth over the pit. It recalled the mannequins on the previous floor and how one had a book open on 2 torture devices. Here was one of those torture devices. A leg snare that not only held you upside down, but swung you back and forth. Something fell out of my jeans pocket. My pocket knife. The one I carry around all the time because I'm in construction and I live in the South and you never know when you'll need it. I needed it then, but as far as I knew, it was at least 20 feet below me in a pit of manure-filled bamboo spikes. My head was pulsing and I began to see stars. Already my hands and feet were going numb. I had a coughing fit as I swung, and I'm not sure whether it was my attempt to call out to my friends or something else. They were telling me to just hang on. Yeah, I was hanging on all right, and it hurt. They sprang another trap. A rope ripped against my face. I could taste blood. Then they sprang another trap, and another. But eventually they got it right. Not an easy feat. They had to not only spring the trap, but catch its rope before it sped over the pit and was too far out of reach. Patrick was there, right side up. He put one of the free ropes in my hands. I didn't know how I held on to it. It must have been scary for him to try to hold on to this rope above that pit while sawing at the noose around my leg with his tiny keychain pocket knife. I know it was scary for me. He got me free. I had a moment of extreme panic as I started to drop towards the bamboo spikes, but Patrick was able to help me, along with the other rope he'd put in my hands to get back upright. Then both of us used our weights to swing back and forth above the pit until we had enough momentum to cross. Once there, we threw our ropes for the others to get. Thankfully, those things were pretty substantial, so it was not difficult to get them across the pit and into Jennifer and Greg's hands. The whole ordeal was pretty rough. I feel sapped just thinking about it now. But we had to get our acts together. By we, I mean me, because that affected me the most. The puzzle room was just beyond. We opened the door to the room down the hall, which was about twice as large as the little puzzle chamber on the previous floor. We were startled by what we'd found. There was a table at the center of the room where the puzzle was supposed to be, made of what appeared to be gold. On this golden table were golden shapes that seemed to be part of the table itself, or cast in the same mold. These shapes were a circle, a triangle, a square, and a diamond. There was a heavy wooden chest in the corner of the room with a large golden lock on it. Another chest of the same kind in the opposite corner of the same room without a lock on it. A series of medieval-style woven tapestries on the walls, winding all across the room, showed 4 scenes. A lopsided battle between 2 forces, a well being poisoned, crops burning, and 2 kings at a chessboard. There were also, bizarrely enough, safety equipment hanging on a rack in another corner of the room, including a large apron and a face shield. Naturally, we investigated further, and here are all the clues we gathered. The 4 tapestries on the 4 walls. The one with the battle showed an army facing a much smaller force. The second tapestry depicted a man pouring something into a well, and the third was of crops burning. In the last tapestry, one king had just defeated the other, as shown by their chessboard and the winning king's posture. However, a group of soldiers with their swords drawn was sneaking up behind the king that has won. A heavy wooden chest in one corner of the room with a golden lock, another chest just like it but without a lock. What we judged to be a puzzle itself, a golden table with golden shapes as part of its tabletop. These shapes, a circle, a triangle, a square, and a diamond, were actually part of the tabletop, not on it, as if they had been cast from the same mold. The golden table could not be moved, no matter how much we tried to push it, suggesting it might have been secured to the floor. Increasingly, we found that the tops of the shapes unscrewed. When unscrewed, the circular open of each was about 4 inches in diameter. Inside was a pungent-smelling liquid that was very irritating, causing us to quickly screw the tops back on. Each of these golden shapes was the same height, probably about 3 feet tall, and we had judged the liquid to be about halfway to the top of each. Their other dimensions varied. We could not move the golden shapes filled with the pungent-smelling liquid, just like we could not move the table. Inside the chest without a lock, we found an old postcard with a checkerboard design and nothing else on it, a clear box made of a very durable plastic with a golden key inside it. We could neither break the box nor fit the box inside any of the unscrewed golden shapes, and 4 pieces of chalk. These pieces of chalk were in a circle, triangle, square, and star, not diamond, shape, and probably averaged about 2 to 3.5 inches in diameter. One set of protective equipment on a rack, in another corner, an apron, a face shield with a respirator, and gloves. The measurements were eyeballing at guesses. We had no tools to measure with. The whole time we were trying to find out whose puzzle this was. Well, they were all of ours, but it seemed with our past puzzles like each one was connected to one of us in particular, like with Jennifer's Fibonacci sequence or Patrick's Penrose stairs. It took me a while, but thinking about their mumbo-jumbo number sequences and paradoxes along with the clues we'd gathered in this room jogged loose a bit of mumbo-jumbo in my own brain. Parando's paradox, I said. Beg your pardon? Greg said, looking up from the notes he was taking. I used to play chess and checkers a lot, I said. Even back when we were making up this house. I haven't touched this stuff much after high school, but I do occasionally. Yeah, I was a bit of a geek. Still am and proud of it. Some other kid would throw around this fancy term called Parando's paradox, which I guess is a showy way of putting when you use a losing strategy to win a game. It gets done in games like chess and checkers. There's this old story about this Chinese general that wins horse races against his king, and he does it by starting with his slowest horse. Figures the king wants to win and will use his fastest one up front, so the king wins the first round. But in the second round, the general uses his fastest horse, while at that point the king is forced to use a slower horse than his best unless he wants to use the fatigued animal. The general wins that second match. In the final match, the general wins again because at that point the king has used up all his fastest horses. Okay, Greg said. Interesting, but how are we going to apply that to the puzzle? Maybe we have to fail this puzzle, Jennifer said, in order to solve it. How are we supposed to do that without summoning those entities? Patrick said. Rule 5. We fail the puzzle. The entities come after us. We traded looks. For then, I had been hoping that we wouldn't see the entities on this floor, that we would solve this puzzle the first time. Maybe I'd been hoping in vain. We put our heads together and went over the clues of the 3rd floor puzzle again. Part 7. The 3rd puzzle's solution.
Beyond the pungent aroma of what was in the golden containers, it was the safety equipment that clued us in to the acidity of the liquid inside them.
If I remember my chemistry classes correctly, Jennifer said, hydrofluoric acid can dissolve many things, but not gold. That's why the table, the containers, the key, and the lock on that one chest are all gold. Sure, those containers could be something else, like a beaker made of plastic, but that doesn't dissolve. But the gold is a clue to what that substance is. Gold was also very important to alchemists of past eras, Greg observed. Transmutation, the perfection of all matter. Right, Jennifer said. Right. Now, hydrofluoric acid, or something similar to it, could dissolve many plastics, like the plastic of that clear box containing the key, if my guess is right.
We can't move those golden containers, Patrick said. They're merged with the table, and the table won't budge. So, how do we pour the liquid into the plastic container? I thought about that one for a while. We don't, I eventually said. That's where the chalk comes in. We don't have all the right shapes to solve the puzzle. We're missing a diamond chalk piece. But I'm thinking, based on their size, we have enough pieces of chalk to overflow the golden container. If we place the plastic box holding the key on the table beneath that container, then put all of the chalk in to raise the liquid level and overflow the acid, whether it's hydrofluoric or something else, we could melt through that box and get the key out. We'd lose the puzzle because we'd put all the wrong shapes in, but we get the key to what I'm assuming is the locked chest.
A losing strategy,
Patrick said.
So what's in the locked chest?
I think we're meant to find out, I said. We put the clear plastic box with the key in it right up against the triangle shape on the tabletop. I guess we could have chosen any of the shapes, but if any of them had less total volume than the others, we suppose it would be the triangle. Then I donned the safety equipment, the face protection, the respirator, and the gloves. I insisted because it was the puzzle that so far seemed most connected to me. My puzzle. I wanted to be the one to risk my life on it if something in the chalk pieces reacted with the acid and it all exploded in my face. I didn't say the last part to my friends because I didn't want them to worry and talk me out of it. I almost went back to that laboratory to get some forceps and a spatula or something to help me put the chalk in without any of the acid splashing up on me, but I really didn't want to see that Frankenstein thing again. It had parts of each of us, and there was something about it. What if, with the strength we'd already gotten a taste of, it had broken free of its straps after we left the room? I put that thought down, put my mind to the puzzle in front of me. I told the others to get back, against the walls, to get ready, not just for the chemical reaction, but for the entities. I would have asked them to leave the room, but if and when the entities came, I didn't want them to be out in the hall. Carefully, so as to avoid splashing, I nudged each piece where I put it on the rim of the open triangle container, letting it slide down while I backed away a little. The substance bubbled and frothed. I did it as quickly as I could while being careful so that we might take advantage of the bubbling to get the substance overflowing. Sure enough, after all the chalk shapes had been placed in, the liquid inside the golden container overflowed. I stepped back and watched with the others as it melted through the clear container that the golden key was in. At the same time, something clicked in a stuttering way, like a machine failing to get started. And then we heard the entities approaching in the hallway outside the room. 1, delay for that jerk to the side. 2, 3. They didn't walk in unison, but you could pick out a few of their footsteps or hoofsteps or whatever their lower extremities ended in. We failed a puzzle and broken a rule, but intentionally this time.
The key, Patrick said. Unlock the other chest.
All of us started walking towards the table at once. I was surprised we all remembered the rule about not running. Rule number 4. That rule also stated that the entities could run if we ran. Let me handle it, I said. I've still got my gloves on. I knocked the golden key from the table to the floor in the hopes of getting most or all of the residual acid off. I'd heard stories about people getting poisoned or burned through their gloves. That's why you usually wanted to use a tool like forceps or a spatula to handle such things. Here we go, I said, picking the key up off the floor. I walked as quickly as I could over to the locked chest in the corner of the room, unlocked its golden lock with the golden key and dropped the key. My friends were looking over my shoulder by the time I opened the chest.
Inside were more chalk shapes, another circle, another triangle, another square, and a diamond, which we had been missing before. We had everything we needed to try again. The entities were getting close. While my friends huddled together in the corner of the room furthest from the entryway, I opened all of the other containers on the table and tried all of them. Circle for circle, triangle for triangle, square for square, and diamond for diamond. As I was doing diamond, Jennifer and Patrick got to yelling. One of the entities was now in the room with us. I did not turn to look, but I was so quick about the diamond shape that some of the liquid splashed up into my gloved hand. It seared right through the glove. I didn't know if that was due to the acid or some kind of reaction. I cried out in pain and yanked the glove off. The back of my hand was red, but it wasn't too bad looking. However, I knew that chemical burns could have long-time repercussions. Despite being absorbed in my own pain, I just had to look over my shoulder. No entities. Couldn't hear them coming anymore either. My friends were on me expecting my hand. "Nobody thought to bring a bottle of water?" Patrick said. "What if we got thirsty?" He shook his head, and then from out of an inner pocket in his sports coat, he took out a water bottle. It had his real estate firm's logo on it. "I came here thinking it was a prank," Jennifer said. "'Cause I reckoned that we'd have drinks and refreshments inside once the prank was over." "Well," I said, "that butler on the second floor tried to accommodate us." "Too bad none of us can eat or drink broken glass," Greg said. We chuckled a little at that, which helped me through the pain. Patrick poured some water from his water bottle over my hand. That helped some more. It still burned like crazy though. Through all that, I hadn't paid the other clicking and the grating noise much attention. One of the tapestries, the one with the well being poisoned, had fallen to the floor, and there was a small opening in its place. It couldn't have been there before, because we checked behind the tapestries earlier when looking for clues. It was a small opening, not a whole lot larger than an air conditioning duct, but large enough for us to climb into and crawl through. Once again, as with that narrow passage downstairs leading us back, it was dark. Once again, it seemed that something was in there with us. "Sally?" Jennifer said at one point. She was in the rear. She'd stopped crawling behind me. We all did. "Is that you? Say something if that's you." We heard movement. "I think it's behind me," Jennifer said, nearly a whisper. Then the noise stopped. Let's keep going," Jennifer said. "Good call," I said. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. The crawlway ended abruptly. We'd been hoping it might turn and that we'd get to see some light. Some of us got a little panicky. "Wait," Patrick said. He was in the front. "I don't see a bit of light." There was a succession of banging noises. Then our tunnel got a lot brighter. When we crawled out and hopped down a few feet, we found ourselves back on the third floor anteroom next to the stairs. Patrick had knocked down one of the paintings with a bunch of rusted gears. It had been covering the opening. We'd solved the third floor puzzle. We had needed to lose first in order to win, but we passed it. According to the rules, we were free to move up the stairs to the next floor. 2 more floors, and then the attic, and the treasure. For now, the 4th floor awaited us. Part 8. The 4th floor. As I went up the stairs with the others, it was once more like I was being watched. Were the entities like Walt the Stairman, who, for all I knew, was wedged up against the wall and looking down at us, always there but invisible? Or did they only exist in the house when we broke a rule? Were we any closer to understanding what they were? And why did Walt appear for a moment when I mentioned him the first time? These were the kind of questions that occupied my thoughts, though I didn't bring them up. I think we were all afraid to invoke Walt's name again on the stairs because of what happened before. We got to the 4th floor landing. In the anteroom were mirrors on opposite walls facing each other. On a large table there was a dollhouse that looked exactly like the house we were in. A demon was reaching his hand into the open side of the dollhouse. "It's all right," I said. "It's just a doll. Just a life-size doll, remember?" But we were all tense, and we couldn't stop staring at it as we passed around the dollhouse it had its hand on. The thing was standing outside the dollhouse, looking in. It had to be over 6 feet tall, dark red, horns, eyes without irises. Now where had I seen that before? Intently focused on what it played with in the house, we'd drawn in that life-size demon doll's appearance years ago in one of Greg's sketchbooks, but I couldn't remember that detail about the eyes. Was it something that the house filled in for us? We couldn't help but get closer to the dollhouse on the table because we had a notion of what we might see inside. Where the dollhouse was open, you could see into the first 4 anterooms along with the stairway as well as some of the other rooms we had been to. But another detail I wasn't sure whether we had put in as kids, the 5th floor and the attic were completely closed off. They were not part of what we could see into. In the dollhouse, standing in the 4th floor anteroom, the same room we were in now, was a doll of each of us, standing in the same exact places we were standing, wearing the same exact clothes that we were wearing. The life-size demon doll that was outside the dollhouse with the rest of us. Its clawed hand was wrapped around the Greg doll.
"Did we do all this?"
Jennifer said.
"I don't know,"
Greg said. He had his new sketchbook open and was beginning to draw or write something in it, but then he noticed me watching. "Greg," I said, "do you still have the old sketchbooks? The ones with our designs in them?"
"I already told you."
"I'm asking again, do you have them?"
"No."
"Whatever has them," I said, "I think we've got to get them back."
"Good luck,"
Greg said.
"You'd have to leave this house and probably search deep in a dump somewhere near where we used to live, if they haven't been pulverized by a trash compactor beyond recognition and become plant food over the years."
We opened the door to a sitting room. Being the last person out of the anteroom, I glanced back again at the little dollhouse replica of this house and the life-size demon doll standing outside it. It was still reaching in, but now I was sure that its eye, the right eye that I could see, had moved. Its eye was focused on us. "Hurry," I said, pushing the person in front of me. I closed the door as quickly as I could and told the others what I'd seen. I remember wishing we had put a lock on that door when we were kids. We talked about how as we got towards the top, more of the things we'd put into the house were going to try to get us to run, to break rule number 4. That was how we had designed it to be, and that was probably what the house was going to try to do when it filled in the gaps, like with the movement of that demon's eye. But we didn't have much of a respite to sit around and chat. Already, our hands were full with the 4th floor sitting room. We called it a sitting room years ago, but I suppose it might be called a lounge or waiting room today, a place where guests waited for entry to a ballroom beyond. There were more mannequins in this sitting room. Dressed in formal party attire, they sat on upholstered benches, chairs, and couches gathered at the center of the room and against the walls. They held glass receptacles of various murky-colored fluids. It was unclear whether those were for alchemy or for drinking. The container shapes as well as the liquids were ambiguous. There were nasty oddities enough in that room, including stuffed animals mounted on the wall. One of those animals was a human head. I wasn't sure if it was intended to be real. Recalling the sketchbook designs, we merely drawn a human head in there. Greg's idea and probably his drawing too. In the corner was a tall curio cabinet, all glass doors with wooden support. Within that curio cabinet were many jars of preserved things, from the relatively mundane like pickled pig's feet to the kinds of stuff that got under your skin and stayed there, like an elephant fetus. I kept thinking about how its pale, gelatinous pronto trunk wrapped around its partially developed body. I wandered closer to the curio cabinet and its jars of preserved things because I thought I saw a heart in there, maybe human. But Jennifer stopped me.
"You've got a trap over there,"
she said, pointing to an inconspicuous closet door next to the cabinet. The closet door started to open. It seemed that I'd already triggered the pressure plate beneath the floor. By the time the door was opening, however, I was already well away. Another mannequin servant came out, like the butler from downstairs. It too came out in a hurry, with all the force of a very large spring. Its forearm was draped with coats, scarves, and purses that dangled back and forth when it stopped.
"Might I take that from you?"
it said in a recorded voice similar to the mannequin butler's downstairs. Sticking out from between the items it was carrying were the sharpened ends of coat hangers, unbent and facing outwards like spear tips. Seemed like it was wanting to take my life from me. "Now where were you when we entered the house?" Patrick said to the mannequin. He started to take off his coat. "Just kidding. I think I'll hold on to this." It was a good thing, though, that we had triggered that trap, because the door into the ballroom was actually locked. Unlike with the puzzles, which we didn't have much prior knowledge of because we had not directly created them as kids, we knew the solution already. We knew the key to be in a purse or a coat pocket in one of the things draped over the mannequin servant's arm. We found it easily enough. As we were heading over to the ballroom door with the key, however, we heard a song coming on from the ballroom behind the door. It didn't take us long to recognize. It was the Sleeping Beauty song from the 1959 film. Rather than coming from an old record player like the other song downstairs, however, this one seemed to be coming from a person in the next room who was singing. We thought it sounded like Sally. This was not something we planned into the designs at all. After saying as much out loud, we quickly unlocked the door and burst into the ballroom. But the singing had stopped as soon as the door had opened. There was no one. No one yet, anyway. The ballroom was pretty empty except for some rows of wooden chairs next to the stage. We sat in 4 of them, close together, and we waited. We waited for the heavy reddish-brown curtains like the color of old blood, to open. Lit up on the stage was a ventriloquist dummy and a man. Rather, a ventriloquist dummy and the corpse of a man. The corpse sagged in its chair. Its tuxedo was barely recognizable. Rotting goop pooled at its feet. As soon as the curtains had opened, the smell had hit us like a dump truck carrying dead bodies. But the ventriloquist dummy on the corpse's hand was upright, facing us. It began to talk.
My, what a lovely audience we have here. Are you ladies and gentlemen ready to see some magic?
The dummy assaulted us with a series of bad jokes, many of them having to do with its dead and decaying partner. It proceeded to do some equally bad card tricks, at one point flinging the cards down directly at us.
Tough crowd,
it said.
But not to worry, ladies and gentlemen. My final trick is going to put you on pins and needles and leave you there. Well, one of you. I'll need a volunteer from the audience. Please note that it is necessary for someone to volunteer. Otherwise, things could get very awkward. Very awkward indeed.
At that point, the dummy talked in a different voice, like its mouth was partially closed as if it was giving a voice to the dead man that propped it up.
Hey, partner, it's not considered volunteering if it's required.
While the dummy argued with an inanimate rotting corpse, the rest of us debated who should go up. We thought we had a pretty good idea of what we'd face up there. All of us started to say we would be the one to do it. It was both a blessing and a curse because while it showed how much we cared about each other, it also made it more difficult to decide.
No offense, guys,
Jennifer said,
but the rest of you aren't exactly petite. We need the smallest person of us to go up there. That's me.
That may be true, Patrick said, but Greg's bonier than you are. Taller, but a little thinner. Not that I'm trying to throw him under the bus, just pointing that out. Look, I said, maybe we should draw straws or something. There's gotta be something here we could use for straws. No, it's fine, Greg said. His face was contorted. I'll do it. We argued back and forth for a while, but after little progress decided to just let Greg do it. We thanked him. A lot. Want me to hold on to that sketchbook for you? I said. Sure, he said. He opened it up and wrote or drew some things with his pencil, then signed and handed me both his pencil and sketchbook. I opened up the sketchbook and flipped through it as he walked up to the stage. There were notes and rough sketches about some of the things we'd seen, as well as some notes and diagrams for the puzzles we solved. On the last page, before a whole lot of blank pages, was this note. You guys are the best. No matter what happens, silver lining. We got the chance to do this, together. If something does happen to me, tell my wife and kid. Well, make something up. Whatever's clever. G. By the time I glanced up from his sketchbook, Greg was on the stage with the dummy and the corpse. The dummy whooped and clapped at Greg as he approached. The dead body in the chair jerked around because of the movement of the dummy on its arm, causing it to deposit yet more fluid and matter to the puddle at its feet. Then the dummy yelled,
Bring out the Iron Maiden!
Here was the other torture trap alluded to in that mannequin's open book in the second floor drawing room. A large metal cabinet, its shape suggesting a bloated human body, screeched forward. It moved from out the darkness towards the front of the stage. It must have been on a rail. I couldn't see who, if anyone, was pushing it. The head-like protrusion at the top of the Iron Maiden depicted a stylized human face caught in the extremes of pain. When the Iron Maiden stopped moving forward, it opened up, revealing the sharp metal spikes that covered the inside of it. The dummy said,
"Now get on in and make yourself as big as you can. Think big thoughts. Trust me, I'm a magician."
We did not trust the dummy. By the way, never trust a ventriloquist dummy whose partner is a rotting corpse. According to what we put in one of Greg's old sketchbooks years ago, the spikes should be just long enough, or just short enough, to not touch the person inside if they were very careful. If, however, any pressure whatsoever were applied to those spikes, the spikes would extend fully and pierce the body within. Greg waved to us from the stage. We told him to be careful. I firmly believe that all of us, Greg included, were praying that the trap would perform as we designed it. A moment later, Greg was inside. Another moment, and it was closing. Then it snapped shut. We heard muffled screams. Blood oozed out from the bottom of the Iron Maiden torture device. The dummy laughed and laughed. We called out to Greg, started to rush the stage. I was on the verge of breaking the house's rule by running when we heard Greg's muffled voice from within the Iron Maiden.
"It's okay, guys,"
he said.
"I'm alright. The house is doing that, not me."
When the Iron Maiden opened up, he was covered in what looked like blood. Thankfully, none of it was his own. We used the stage curtains to try to get that nasty stuff off him. No telling whose blood it was, or if it was even blood. It was thick, weird. The texture and smell were off. The dummy was cackling at us.
"Get out of here,"
it said between its laughter.
"Show's over. The door's unlocked. Don't let it hit you on the way out."
I can't say we were happy, but we were eager to oblige. We got out and found ourselves in a hall. It was similar to the one directly beneath us on the previous floor, yet it did not have a pit with leg snare ropes. There was another trap, one we anticipated but was still difficult to navigate. The smooth floor at one point shifted beneath us, becoming a ramp. We had to hold onto each other in the walls to keep from running downhill unintentionally. If you ran, you broke rule number 4. Not only would the entities come after you, they would be running. We didn't know if they'd stop running if we stopped. Didn't want to test it. Not only that, the rules suggested they'd be faster than us. In a way, this prepared us for the puzzle room beyond, the 4th floor puzzle. Like both the hallway on the previous floor and this one, the puzzle room seemed to be the same size as the one beneath us, about like a slightly below average size bedroom. We walked in and were yet again taken aback by what was there. What dominated this puzzle room was this gigantic people-sized hamster or gerbil wheel at the center. Here again, the center of the room was where the puzzle should be according to our designs. Another standout object was a statue nearly 5 feet high of a white elephant. It was next to a wall. A broom with a dustpan attached to it was in a corner. On the other side of the room was a coffee table with a sparkling orb made of bottle caps on the top of it. There was a mound of something like sand or salt on the floor next to the entrance of the room. On one wall was an illustration that we immediately recognized as Greg's. It was this cartoony poster-sized thing showing a giant hamster on a runaround wheel, sprinting like mad. Its wheel had broken loose from its base and was creating a path of devastation through a city. Dead bodies and busted-up vehicles were in its wake. It was goofy. It was grisly. It was Greg. We all remembered Greg putting that into his room years ago, even though back then we did not consciously know that it would be a clue to the puzzle we hadn't created. Like for the other clues in the other puzzles, we all looked at him and waited. There were only 2 more people whose puzzle this could be, Sally or Greg. Greg's illustration seemed to give us our answer.
"Okay,"
Greg said.
"Okay, I never told anyone this, well, other than Sally, but I used to have a pet hamster. Seems like a small thing, but it was a big deal to me. Never had a pet since. This was before we made a regular occurrence out of our haunted house designing back in that apartment complex. I had this pet hamster, right? A very good pet hamster. About as well behaved as a hamster could be. Played well. Never bit me once. But it bit my aunt when she stuck her finger into his terrarium and was waving it around as some animals would do if you get too crazy with them. And she let that bite get infected. Well,
He licked his lips. He stared down at his shoes.
at some point she had to go to the hospital for an infection caused by such a simple thing. Just a harmless little hamster bite that she clearly hadn't taken care of like she should. She got better from that infection, but that wasn't the end of it. Kept complaining about what she suffered and about her hospital bill, and about how that hamster was a threat to other people. One thing led to another until one day she went into my room in our apartment while I was at school when she was supposed to be visiting my mother or something, and she euthanized the little guy, to put it lightly. That's terrible, Jennifer said. Well, yeah, Greg said, but it taught me something important. Important lessons, you know? When people feel threatened, even by a relatively harmless animal minding its own business, they often want to end that threat.
Could have been revenge, Patrick said. Hospital bills are no joke.
I don't think that's it,
Greg said.
but anyway, can't bring it back no more than I can bring back my childhood. What are you gonna do? Well, we can try to solve this puzzle, Jennifer said. We might not be able to bring your old pet hamster back, but maybe we can still have our old human friend Sally. Or save her soul at the very least.
Greg looked at her.
Right,
He eventually said. We went about the room and studied the clues more carefully. Here are the clues for the fourth floor puzzle. A giant-sized hamster or gerbil wheel large enough for people to run around in. It could not be moved or started from the outside. We did not want to get inside and try to move it from there yet, because we were afraid this would activate the puzzle. When we ran our hands over the inside of it, we found it to be very smooth, maybe too smooth to get a good traction on, but there were slightly raised metal bands along the inside at about 6 feet intervals. These were also very smooth, suggesting you'd slip off them if you tried to walk or run on them. A statue of a white elephant. The white elephant was probably a little over 4 feet tall and about 5 feet in length, not counting its trunk. We were able to move and even lift it, but it was solid and about as heavy as one of us. Its trunk curled out in front of it, forming a loop. A sparkling orb made of bottle caps. It was on a little pedestal atop an ordinary wooden coffee table. The orb was probably about 3 feet in diameter. Beside the entrance, a mound of what we thought likeliest to be salt based on its appearance. We weren't able to taste test that stuff. This mound was roughly 3 feet across and about half an inch deep. A simple wooden broom with a dustpan. Greg's cartoony illustration on the wall of a gigantic hamster and a gigantic wheel running amok through a city causing damage. Broken things and dead bodies lay in its wake. Despite its both goofy and grisly nature, you can tell how afraid the hamster was, even though it was the one causing all the damage. The hamster wheel appeared to be asking us to get inside and run. But how would we do that without violating the fourth rule? This was the rule we least wanted to break. Because not only would the entities come after us, they'd be running too. Part 9. The fourth puzzle's solution. All signs pointed to us getting inside the giant hamster wheel and running. It looked like we'd have to break the fourth rule. Greg's illustration of the giant hamster running its broken wheel through a city made us think we had to do something like that ourselves. Well, the running part. The broken part made us think we were meant to break a rule. When it came to the white elephant, Jennifer mentioned something she'd learned in a university lit class from some Hemingway story about abortion. Something symbolic about a white elephant being a gift from kings to people they didn't like. A white elephant was a costly gift to maintain, and it was so revered that you couldn't put it to work to get your money back. It was a gift you didn't want. Patrick thought maybe it was related to Greg's hamster and the hospital bills his aunt had to pay after her bite got infected. Greg's sporadic mumblings while taking notes helped us to the conclusion that the glittering orb made of old bottle caps was related to a favorite saying of his when younger. One person's trash is another's treasure. Apparently, it was even an expression he reminded himself of nowadays when helping design advertisements. As for the salt,
Once we tried a little on the smooth surface of the inside of the wheel and ran our hands over it, it seemed like it would not give us a whole lot more traction when running inside. Then, I remembered something I heard about how salt might keep out ghosts and demons, and I said as much to the others. We got ready to sweep it up using the broom and dustpan. Figured we'd put it in front of the room's opening. If those entities ran towards us once we broke rule number 4, once we got to running inside the wheel, maybe that salt on the floor would stop them. For a while, Greg had been pretty silent, mostly only jotting down and drawing things in his new sketchbook, but then he had a whole lot to say.
Gallon guys, Greg said, I've done a fair amount of research on matters concerning ghosts and demons. I thought it would help with my duties back when I gave a hoot and wasn't a slave to the corporate system. Salt doesn't always work, and we don't know if the entities we'll have fall under those categories. Besides, we should take a moment to consider something important. You know how we were vague with some items in the house when we put them into the design as kids? And how we think the house might be? Filling in the missing details? Well, we left the puzzles vague. I think it wants us to get into the wheel and run. I think it's using the salt to trick us into doing that. But we came up with the clues, Jennifer said, including the salt.
Sure, but that's why the clues all fit, Greg said.
Whether it's a piece we literally use to solve a puzzle or just a hint of its solution, we did plan on each floor puzzle relating to one of us. That's why one person took care of the items in each puzzle room instead of us all handling them together. But at that time, I think it was rather random. We didn't know how they'd all fit together. We weren't sure about the puzzles or didn't want to do them yet.
That's right, Patrick said. And those items, at least for me, were placeholders. I remember thinking that once I figured out what my puzzle would be, I'd come back to it, change some of the things in the room to be more clue-like.
But we didn't come back to it, Greg said. We considered the house finished with the puzzles still nothing more than the things around them, with arrows or circles and the word puzzle pointing out where it would be.
No, I said. We didn't finish. The house was complete, but not finished. There were some things we could have made better. We gave up. About the time we gave up on Sally coming back.
Whatever the case, Greg said, I'm pretty sure the house has been using what we put in each puzzle room to make up the puzzles for us. Maybe it's somehow tapping into our memories or subconscious to do that. Or maybe it's just using what's in the house. I don't know. Either way, it wants us to fail. If we put that salt down in front of the entrance, thinking the entities won't pass beyond it, and one of us gets in the wheel and runs, I believe we'd be doing exactly what it wants. We haven't seen these things run yet. I don't think we have to. We should exhaust all our options first.
Going back to the drawing board, which for Greg was back to his sketchbook note-taking, we returned to ways of making the wheel spin without any of us running inside it. That was a doozy, because we could not get it to budge from the outside, even when gripping the bands that ran about 6 feet intervals along the interior. Somebody said something about the wheel needing a person's weight in there for it to spin, about how if someone just got in there, it would unlock the wheel's movement and the others of us might be able to spin it from the outside while the other person was inside. The force of the spin would keep them in place. They wouldn't need to run. We had our concerns though. What if the person inside lost their footing, or the people outside made a mistake and the person inside accidentally started running? That's about when we remembered that the white elephant statue, when we tried to move it, had seemed to weigh about as much as a person. The white elephant statue might not be so useless or burdensome after all. We hauled it and set it down beside the giant hamster wheel.
Let's hope it's worth its weight, Jennifer said.
She gave it a little pat. I had an idea from something I'd seen another guy do in construction. After discussing it, we turned that treasure back into trash. We broke the sparkling globe of bottle caps. We swept up the salt into the dustpan and put it down inside the wheel where we would place the elephant. Then, similar to a kind of trick I'd seen someone in construction who did not have their tools on hand use to hold something in place temporarily, we put the bottle caps in among the salt. We faced some up and some down. Neither the teeth at the bottom of the bottle caps nor the salt were ideal for holding anything in place, much less the smooth wheel's interior to the relatively smooth bottoms of the elephant statue's feet.
But if we used the salt and the toothy bottle caps in conjunction for a slight grip for when we got the wheel going, the force of its spin when we spun it faster might be enough to keep the elephant statue in place. We used the broom for something other than just sweeping. We put it inside the little loop of the elephant's trunk. Our thinking was that the broom handle could function as a long handle we could all grip. Then we took deep breaths, did our little counting thing that by now had become a ritual, and together lifted the heavy elephant statue up and placed it in the wheel. Something clicked. We didn't waste any time. If we waited too long after that click, we might fail the puzzle. Maybe we had already failed. There was enough space on the broom handle extending from the elephant's trunk for each of us to put our hands on it. It took us a little bit to get our rhythm in sync, but together we got the wheel moving. We had to get it going fast to keep the elephant from dropping. Faster. A little salt sprayed out the sides, the bottle caps alternating facing up and down held. Faster. The wheel was spinning at a running pace, but for all we knew the puzzle hadn't been solved. No doors opened up to us. My arms felt like they were being pulled out of their sockets. I imagined they'd keep going, still gripped on the broom handle. One separated from my body as the wheel was spun more and more frantically. I kept glancing at the crazy yet frightened cartoony face of the hamster and its giant wheel terrorizing the city in that illustration on the wall. The four of us in the white elephant statue got that wheel going so fast that I began to think it was a wonder it didn't break loose like the one in the illustration. That's exactly what it did. When the wheel finally broke loose from its frame, Greg yelled out for us to let go. I suppose it was a little similar to how he had to let go of his pet hamster when he was a kid, except this physically hurt. Of course, the longer you held on, the more it would have hurt. The giant hamster wheel and the elephant in it slammed against the wall and toppled. I was surprised it didn't so much as put a dent or crack in the wall. We were all groaning and rubbing our shoulders, arms, or hands. We sat for a while. No sign of the entities or the footsteps, but we sat facing the room's entrance just in case. Where the wheel had been, a hole had opened up under its frame. As we started to feel better, we got up and peered down into the hole. It was slanted like a laundry chute, or like a pitch-black water slide tube without the water. Well, I said, we solved the puzzle, so this should be pretty straightforward. We debated for a little, but then decided to risk it. Nothing else had opened up to us, and we knew, because of how we designed the house in Greg's old sketchbooks, that the door back through the ballroom would be locked to us. Not that we were eager to go back through there anyway. As we were starting to play rock, paper, scissors to decide who would go first, Patrick said in an even, almost monotone Geronimo as he disappeared down the chute. We waited for a minute, then we called. When we didn't hear back, we decided to go down after him. We agreed to each wait about 30 seconds so as to avoid hitting each other. I went last. It was a long slide down in the darkness. I called out to the others as I went down it. No one replied back. I felt alone for the first time I'd been in that house. Then I heard agonized shouts up ahead. I tried to slow myself as much as I could by applying pressure to my heels and putting my hands against the walls. It hurt, but not as much as hitting my friends would. I heard them calling up to me. Patrick had slammed into a wall down there. He was hurt. Moving my shoes to the side when I was really close, I avoided much of the impact with Jennifer in front of me. She grunted as both of us did our best to buffer the impact. I could see nothing. Probably the darkest place I'd been in. Flashlights might have come in handy. Maybe they were considered electronic by the house, but we could have at least used a candle or gas lantern. Something. Patrick had checked ahead that electricity was running to the house. We banked on being able to use the house's lights that we had drawn in years ago, but we hadn't taken into account the secret puzzle corridors in between. By the way, that was something else we didn't put into the house. I'm not sure if we forgot or if we hadn't done it yet because we never made the puzzles. As far as we knew, the house made those secret corridors for us. Down there in the dark, we were pretty sure Patrick had broken one of his legs. I guess we all hoped that due to some magic of the house, it would somehow deposit us from this slide or chute into the floor we'd been on above us. You know, paradoxes and everything. Seemed like the house liked those. Instead, we just slid down and hit a wall. "Hang on," Patrick said. "There's some rugs above me protruding from the wall. I think we're meant to climb back up." Man, this hurts. Can you climb, Pat? Greg said. Maybe, he said. If I can only use my arms, my good leg.
We could help from below,
Jennifer said. Just don't touch my right leg.
Can't see it, Pat,
Greg said.
Can't see nothing.
I'll let you know with a scream. Speaking of screams, something was sliding down towards me. I was the last of the four of us. Guys, I began. We've got Something slammed into me. Luckily, it struck my shoulders and the top of my back and not my head. Even so, pain went up and down me, like my entire body had become a bad tooth. It took my mind off the chemical burns on the back of my hand that had still been somewhat bothering me. Fingers or something like fingers got into my hair. I tried to twist around to see if I could get some leverage on whoever or whatever was behind me, but it kept me from getting a good handle on it. Go up, I said. There's something physical in here with us. It's grabbing me. Grunting through his own pain, Patrick started to climb up the rungs, and Greg and Jennifer after him. I couldn't see them at all, but I heard them going up. I gave it a warning in case it was a person, like Sally in there with us. Told it to let go unless it wanted to get popped. Then I used all the strength I had from that position to strike behind me with my hands and elbows. I hit air. Dark, blank, dry nothing. When I climbed up behind the others, I kept thinking how I felt something on my neck or back. Couldn't tell how much of that was the after effect of getting struck or my imagination. There was a light above. Kept thinking something would grab my foot and yank me down. It didn't. The ladder brought us back up to the 4th floor anteroom next to the stairs, where a panel in the floor had opened up. My pain after getting clobbered by whatever had been behind me was residing to a dull, tired throb. Patrick was hurt worse. However, he could stand and even walk on his foot, though he hobbled. It seemed to be an ankle sprain rather than a broken bone. Even so, we had to comfort him as he expressed his worries of being a dead weight. Now I might as well have turned back before, he said as Jennifer and I got on either side of him. I got the feeling that ain't the case, I said.
You took one for the team, Pat,
Greg said.
If not for you, then someone else probably would have gotten messed up. Somebody had to go first. Hey,
Jennifer said.
We just have one more floor left.
It was true. One more floor, and then the attic and whatever secrets it held. Secrets like the treasure. Propping Patrick up, we stood together facing the flight of the stairs that would take us to the 5th floor. Part 10. The 5th floor. Together, we walked up the final flight of stairs to the 5th floor. We had not designed a way into the attic, which is one of the reasons I considered our designs unfinished. Years ago, sitting in our parents' apartments, we had made the notion that the 5th floor puzzle room would take whoever solved the 5th puzzle directly to the attic. The attic was a treasure room as well as an attic after all, and we had intended to make it very difficult to get there. As I've mentioned, if we thought that we might someday face this house and that making it as difficult as we could back then would somehow help us get our friend Sally back, I don't think we ever stated it aloud as kids. Based on what we'd seen so far as adults, we could only assume that the house would fill in the details as to how we would get from the puzzle room to the attic. Before the puzzle room and the attic, though, there was the rest of the 5th floor that needed crossing. By the time we got up the stairs and were walking through the 5th floor anteroom, Patrick seemed to have gotten better at hobbling on what we were hoping was just a bad ankle sprain. The expressions on his face, though, made me think that the pain was as bad or worse than it had been. In this anteroom, there were a series of photorealistic paintings that my mind kept telling me were real blown-up photographs. The frames were gilded and elegant, a stark contrast to the subject matter. These framed pictures were about the dolls' head pots with plants in them on the front porch of the house. From left to right on one wall, they showed first a doll head being removed from its body, then it being sawed open with a saw, then filled with an actual brain, then filled the rest of the way with soil. The final 2 pictures showed a dead or dying plant, something like a small tomato plant without its fruit, being transplanted to the doll head pot, and lastly, what looked like a dried shriveled heart being attached to a branch of the dead or dying plant with twine, as if the dried heart were some kind of makeshift fruit. In all of these pictures, the hands of whoever was doing these things was always out of view.
That brain and heart,
Patrick said. That wasn't our doing. Yeah, Greg said. Not to mention how realistic it is. Guess I was a good enough doodler as a kid, but I couldn't have made anything approaching that level of realism in one of those old sketchbooks. Nobody could. It's like someone really took pictures while putting one of those doll head pots out in front together, Jennifer said, and then took some liberties. My mouth has gotten very dry. I had to borrow Patrick's water bottle. Well, I said. Sally did like dolls, and the creepier the better. Similar to other anterooms, I think we had put all this stuff in to prepare who was going through the house for what was beyond. We knew that what was on the 5th floor would be almost entirely Sally. Unlike the other floors, which we kind of shared, other than the puzzle room, we ended up moving most of her ideas up to the 5th floor, the highest floor next to the attic, after she had disappeared. We had done that to honor her. By the way, the mannequins on a couple of the other floors had been her idea to begin with. She used to say, "What are mannequins but grown-up dolls?" The next room had some of Sally's creepiest doll ideas. Dolls sat on shelves with their heads completely turned around. Dolls were glued together into towers and pyramids. There was decaying furniture so overrun with dilapidated dolls and doll parts that you couldn't tell where the furniture ended and the doll parts began. Doll heads were used as bowls, vases, and light coverings. Doll limbs were arranged on the floor in random, yet strangely esoteric patterns. The next bedroom was like this as well. But there was a human skeleton in that next bedroom. I nearly fell over and took Patrick with me. Greg and I were supporting Patrick, and his leg hurt at that point. We were taking shifts. The skull on that skeleton had been replaced by a doll's head. It took us a few moments before we recalled that this had been Sally and Greg's idea. However, any relief we had upon remembering was quickly replaced by even more terror. We had not colored anything in Greg's sketchbooks as kids. Any colors were all the house is doing. By now we understood that it liked to fill in the details, often to dramatic effect. The eyes of the doll head on top of the skeleton were green. The hair was blonde, like Sally's. "It's just messing with us," I said. "Hey Patrick, your dead weight, as you called it, is already coming in handy. I think I might have wandered a bit after seeing that skeleton if we weren't propping you up." "Yes," Jennifer said. "A trap should be next to that, between that skeleton and the front of the door." Some dolls sailed past us. My heart seemed like it was halfway out of my ribcage. Sharpened bones had zipped by, missing us by less than a foot. They'd come from an inconspicuous recess in the wall like flying spears. Greg sauntered up next to the other 3 of us, who were trying to support Patrick and keep our own balance at the same. "You've got to spring every trap you can," Greg said. "Treasure hunting 101, or haunted house trapping 101. I'm not really sure." "You're crazy," Jennifer said. "Yeah," he said. "Tell me that again when this is done and we're getting ready to leave." Greg had a decent point. Although the other puzzle rooms had secret passages that had led back to the anterooms and stairway after solving the puzzles, this time would probably be a little different because presumably we'd be going up to the attic and then coming down from the attic, if we survived. It looked like Greg had thrown some dolls into the pressure-plated area for that particular trap. I kept getting mental images of somebody else's sharpened bones sticking out of my body. The next room was even worse by design. The stench of decay hit us as soon as the door was opened. This bedroom was furnished with an opulent nightstand, mirror dresser, and a canopy bed with curtains. There was horse riding paraphernalia decorating the walls and shelves, like an antique riding crop and riding helmet. Sally loved horses. When I used to think about what I hoped had happened to her instead of what probably happened, I would imagine her having run away from the cramped spaces of our apartment complex to become a professional equestrian in some nice, open place. Or maybe she had joined a circus where she did tricks with horses. But she had a good family that she would have been running away from. Even though money had been tight for them, her parents had once paid for all of us to go horseback riding on a ranch together. That had been a whole lot of fun. Scary, but fun. I kept thinking I was going to fall off or get thrown from one of those large animals. Our guide had been aloof, but Sally had helped me through it. I think she helped all of us through it. That had been when she was 11 and the rest of us were 9 and 10. By the time her 12th birthday had come, she was gone.
I went over to the other side of the large, elaborate bedroom and tested the other door. Yep, I said. It's locked. We tried to prepare ourselves for what we, mostly Sally and a heaping of Greg, had decided would be in the canopied bed of this room. It was another something we had to face to go farther. We drew aside the curtains. Inside, a unicorn was lying on the bed. Its horn was broken and a good portion of its face was sawed off to the bone. Flies and maggots had colonized both its surfaces and exposed interiors. It's okay, Patrick said. He stood up on his own without two of us propping him up, though I could see him wince from the effort. It's dead. In its mucky mane were objects that had been braided in, beaded and jeweled trinkets, symbols made of woven vines, and a silver key on a chain. It was the key that we needed. Somebody just had to reach over and unbraid the chain from the dead creature's hair. Jennifer and Greg had been supporting Patrick at the time, so I took it upon myself. I got a good breath, careful not to breathe through my nose, steeled myself, and figured I would just dive right in. The condition that the mane was in, it seemed the hair might just pull away with the key. A large horse's eye opened. We all got back as the, by all appearances, rotting unicorn carcass stood up on the bed and clopped down. On the bed where it had lain were pieces of hair and flesh that made an outline of its body. It galloped over to us, backed us into a corner. Its front hooves kept trying to clip us. Its green, grim teeth chomped inches from our faces. Its broken horn threatened a slower death than a sharper whole horn could.
One of us has got to run,
Jennifer said,
to distract it while the others get the key.
We can't run, I said. Rule number 4. Wouldn't do to have both the entities and that thing chasing us at the same time. Gonna get ourselves killed if we don't do something, Patrick said. Then, Patrick hollered at the unicorn. He couldn't stomp his feet because of his injury, but I think he'd been hoping to frighten it. My stomach sank as it put a hoof into Patrick's chest, and I thought I heard something snap. At that point, we'd been letting the wall support Patrick, his body completely buckled to the floor.
Patrick,
Jennifer said. Patrick was crawling in a semicircle, face down, jerking.
I'm gonna gouge that thing's eye out,
Greg said. As if understanding, the unicorn aimed its broken horn at Greg's face, and then charged. Jennifer pulled Greg out of the way. The unicorn thumped the wall and rammed against the tree trunk. Then, it walked back and got ready for another charge. The stench was crushing. More flesh, hair, maggots, and the other stuff had fallen off of it. One of its eyes did seem about ready to fall out. Maybe if we could keep dodging, its body would fall apart on its own. Or maybe the unicorn would find a way to keep moving until we were dead. But that got me thinking about falling in horses. It jogged loose a more specific memory of Sally. I'd been riding a horse behind hers on a trail near that ranch. My saddle seemed like it was sliding over, and my body too, and I was sure I was about to fall. The up and down motion was giving me a thrashing at the same time. I'd been trying to shout for help over the sound of hooves. As I alluded to before, our adult guide hadn't been very attentive to us. But Sally had ridden her horse back to me. She got a hold of my reins and was able to slow my horse down. I told her I was afraid and that I didn't want to do horse riding anymore. I was ready to go home. She said something to the effect of, "This horse doesn't want you to fall. It doesn't want you to get hurt. Relax. Work with it, not against it. Your horse will help you to keep from falling." It comforted me and allowed me to enjoy the rest of that day. Recalling that also helped me to remember more details of when Sally had put the unicorn into our design of this house. She had not wanted to put any horses into it. She had not wanted them to be scary or dangerous. Greg had pushed the issue though, because he kept emphasizing that the house needed that kind of stuff from her. The more she had said she should never try to make them scary, the more he had insisted. Eventually, she had compromised with this unicorn. Not a horse, not a mythical version of the horse, but if this zombie unicorn was true to Sally's wishes, I began to think maybe we weren't approaching it the right way. I got as calm as I could, which was very hard given the situation, and walked towards the unicorn. The unicorn had been charging again, but it slowed down like I'd actually confused it. Jennifer and Greg were screaming at me.
I can't speak for Sally, I told them, while being careful not to turn my back on the unicorn. But maybe she'd say that it doesn't want us to get hurt. It's been hurt, though. We should try to work with it. Slowly, I held out a hand. The unicorn snapped towards it, but it stopped. It sniffed the peace offering. I sighed, knowing how unpleasant it would be without really knowing, and I ran my hand through its decomposing scalp. Hair and less solid stuff came away from my fingers. I worked my way up to the key, and I worked the key loose. Greg and Jennifer were able to help Patrick up, who was breathing heavy and said he felt like somebody had taken a sledgehammer to his chest. All of us approached the unicorn and gave it some careful pettings. Even Patrick, who needed assistance. Seemed like Patrick was already recovering from getting hoofed in the chest. I was thinking to myself, I don't know what kind of diet or workout regimen he's on, but I've got to get on that myself. That guy was holding up quite well at things considered. Sliding down a long chute into a wall, getting kicked in the chest by an undead unicorn? Dang. But back to that unicorn. It tried to follow us out of the door when we unlocked the room on the other side. Seemed it was on its way becoming our very own pet zombie unicorn. Jennifer said that Sally would have been proud of how I handled it. I think that made Greg a little jealous. He didn't say as much, but I could tell. The key wouldn't leave inside the lock after we unlocked it, so we figured we had to abandon the key when we shut the door. When the door locked again behind us, it was a more audible click than for the previous floor. We heard the unicorn pawing at the door on the other side. This time, it wasn't a hallway, but a railway. There was a cart, and there was a tacky plastic ghost dangling above it. You know, the cliched little thing that's a sheet with two eyes and a round mouth cut into it. A round hat was on its head, and a cane was in the folds of what constituted as a hand. A little light on the ghost flashed in eerie blue, and an electric cheesy carnival vendor voice said, "Step right up for the ride of your lives. So close but so far if you're dead. Death can be a long, long journey. I should remind you, please keep your arms, legs, and head on your body at all times." Then there was ghoulish laughter. Again, more tacky than scary. We knew from our designs, though, that this tackiness was meant to throw the traverser of haunted houses off, to put them at ease and therefore make what came later even scarier and more dangerous. As I've been saying, we had been trying to make it as scary and dangerous as possible when we were kids, and this, after all, was the 5th floor. Only one person could get into that cart at a time. Maybe 2 kids could have fit, but we weren't kids anymore. It wasn't far that the cart had to go on that railway. It was about the same distance as the hallways directly below us. But we knew that it would go slowly, and that if you didn't get in that cart, if you tried to walk it, you probably would not make it very far. The larger blades would swing more quickly and randomly if you didn't get into the cart. That was how we had designed it anyway. There were little blades inside the cart itself and larger ones in the grooves of the walls. The ones inside the cart stuck out like porcupine's quills, forcing you to stand up, while the larger ones swung back and forth like pendulums, forcing you to duck down into the cart. If you ducked or stood up at the wrong time, you might get yourself fouled up pretty bad. The saving grace for the trap that was the blades operated on prime numbers 5 and below. 2, 3, and 5. Once you figured out the pattern, you could wait the correct number of seconds. Problem was, it was different each time, so the first person didn't have it any easier or harder than the next. Greg offered to go first. He got cut a little at first through his sock by one of the cart's extending and retracting quills, and that gave us a pretty big fright because he still had a long way to go. But at the end of the railway, he got out and shouted back to us that he was alright. I think his pattern had been 2 seconds, then the little cart blades, 5 seconds, then the larger pendulum blades, repeat, or something like that. Or that might have been mine. I don't remember. As soon as Greg jumped out, the cart started coming back. Jennifer went through with some near misses, but without getting cut. I still think that in most days, she's got the best balance and agility out of the 4 of us by far. I waited for Patrick to go because I wanted to watch from behind, in case I could help from that angle in some way. We were most worried about him. Oddly, it was like getting knocked around woke something up in Patrick, because he seemed to do the best of us then. even with a sprained ankle and what we hoped was just a bruised chest. It wasn't pretty though. Patrick shouted about every time he stood up and was grunting in between. When I saw him afterwards, he was all snotty-nosed, bleary-eyed, and drenched in sweat. As for me, I got cut a little in the beginning like Greg did. It was those quills in the cart that got me just like they got Greg. Through my jeans and into the side of my calf as I was trying to stand. It probably would have been a whole lot worse if I'd been wearing shorts. After those first cart blades disappeared though, I was able to duck down and count and learn the seconds for the pendulum blade, and then I had a pretty good idea of my sequence. When I got through, when all of us were through, we glanced over each other's scrapes. Finding Greg and mine to be nothing worthy of stitches, we stopped to celebrate. We gave ourselves a few cheers, figured we deserved it. Patrick joked, I hoped he was joking, that he might keel over and die later from internal injuries, but he'd do all in his power to put that on hold until after we'd gotten the treasure. The house had thrown nearly everything at us, and so far we'd survived. We'd risked our lives. We felt that we could do it a few more times if we had to. We felt that we were readier than ever to see it through to the end. But in the room after the railway, the final puzzle room, baffled us more than any other had. It baffled us through its simplicity. It was a bright room, white walls, white ceiling and floor tiles. There was a medium-sized round wooden table at the center of the room where the puzzle should be. On top of the table was a little wooden tray with a slanted receptacle or nook. There was a silver key in the nook, and there was a wire running behind it and into the wall. We were as thorough as always, searching every square inch and crevice of that puzzle room, which was about the size of the 4th and 3rd floor puzzle rooms. Here are the only clues we could see in the 5th floor puzzle room. A medium-sized round wooden table in the center of the room where the puzzle should be. On the top of this table, there was a wooden tray with a slanted receptacle, kind of like a pocket or nook. Upon closer inspection, we found the receptacle to be about 3 inches wide and about 7 inches deep. A silver key that seemed to be lodged into the bottom of the inside of the tray's nook or receptacle. We had some concerns that removing this key would start the puzzle. A wire running from the receptacle's tray backside and into the wall opposite the room's entrance. A part of the wiring was frayed, almost broken, nearest the back wall. The floors, wall, and ceiling of the room were all white. Combined with the brightness of the room's lighting, it made us feel as if it were difficult to tell exactly where the walls were. Those were all the clues. We were having trouble not just because of how little there was in that room to go on, but because Sally wasn't there with us. This had to be Sally's puzzle. But what did any of this have to do with her? We racked our brains. The only thing I could think of that might relate Sally to the stuff in this room was about puzzles in general. Just like the haunted house had been Sally's idea to begin with, having puzzles in our haunted house had been Sally's idea too. Hadn't it? And hadn't Sally said something about how puzzles, when it really came down to it, were nothing more or less than a collection of rules? And how once you discovered the secret of those rules, you'd solve the puzzle. Jennifer and Patrick felt I might be onto something. Greg wasn't so sure Sally had said those things. I was reminded again of that song on the 2nd floor anteroom, played to us from an old gramophone, about how memory isn't as sure as destiny. Part 11. The 5th Puzzle Solution. Despite how minimalist that room and its puzzle at first seemed to be, we spent a long time in there figuratively banging our heads against those bright walls. That silver key in the nook on the table, the white walls, the brightness of the room, the wire running from the nook's platform and into the wall. What did any of that have to do with Sally? We had a breakthrough when Jennifer made a certain observation almost casually. It was one that did not seem to relate very much at first to the items in the puzzle room. It related more to what I'd brought up earlier about Sally coming up with the idea of puzzles being on each floor. Jennifer pointed out that all of the other puzzles had to do with rules. While it seemed to be the case that each puzzle was more connected to one of us, every puzzle also seemed like it was trying to get us to break one rule in particular as well.
For the 1st floor puzzle, Jennifer said, which was related to me, We had to resist grabbing the treasure, which, according to the 7th rule, should be in the attic.
Yeah, Patrick said. That's right. And with the puzzle that related to me on the 2nd floor, we had to get around that rule about climbing stairs. They looked at me. The one most related to me, I said. That would be the 3rd floor puzzle. The 5th rule is about failing and solving the floor puzzles. We had to fail that one in order to succeed.
Well, let's see,
Greg said.
My puzzle is on the 4th floor, nearly got us to violate the 4th rule. About running. Huh, that's weird. 4th floor puzzle, 4th rule. That is weird,
Jennifer said.
I'm guessing the house did that intentionally. 7th, 6th, 5th, and 4th rules. The rules are going in reverse.
By now, Jennifer was speaking a lot less casually.
If there's a pattern here, the next puzzle should not only be about Sally, but also about the 3rd rule. The one about depositing electronics in that cubbyhole near the house's entrance.
Patrick stood up where he had been sitting. He had to steady himself against one of those white walls that made the room feel much larger than it was. He winced as he took some pressure off his bad ankle. He pointed. That wooden thing on the table, he said, with the wire running from it into the wall. That thing looks like it could be a charging station, doesn't it? We all stared at it for a moment.
You know what?
Jennifer said.
You could be right.
I think it's the silver key in there that's throwing us off, I said. If that's what it is, a charging station or something that can plug into one of our phones. We talked about it. There was no way for us to know if it was a charging station without removing the silver key lodged into the bottom of its nook. If there was some kind of apparatus that plugged into a phone down there, it might have been under where the key was lodged. Then I remembered and brought up the key that had been braided into the rotten unicorn's mane. That key had been silver too, hadn't it? It had unlocked the unicorn's bedroom that we had been trapped inside with that creature. The room was locked behind us when we left. Maybe this silver key was meant to unlock it again, so that we could go back through that bedroom, go downstairs and get a cell phone. That made us a little more confident to remove the key, something we had been reluctant to do for the fear of triggering the puzzle before we're ready. That still left the question of how to get around breaking the rule about electronics. Maybe we should break the electronic phone, Patrick said. That could be what the frayed wire is telling us. So we go downstairs, get a phone, and break it apart. Then we put it back together here and plug it in. Maybe we don't even need to break it. It could be as simple as taking out the battery.
You really think that would work?
Greg said.
Does removing the battery or some other part of an electronic device so that it no longer functions make it no longer an electronic device?
That gave us some pause. Then I remembered something else. Probably wouldn't matter, I said. You'd have to break another rule anyway. Remember that rule about solving each floor puzzle? In addition to what it says about succeeding and failing the puzzle, there is also something in there about not fleeing the puzzle. The entities might come after us anyway as soon as we leave the area.
But didn't we leave the 2nd floor puzzle room?
Jennifer said.
To look again at some of the other rooms in that hallway on the 2nd floor?
Maybe it's considered fleeing once you leave the entire floor, Patrick said. Or once you leave the house, Greg said. Regardless, I said, we can't stay in here forever. I don't know about you guys, but swinging on a rope upside down, getting my hand burned, climbing and sliding and fear and everything else has got me bushed. Patrick's no doubt feeling worse than I am. I think adrenaline has been propping us all up. I don't know how long that's gonna last. I think one of us should go ahead down and get a cell phone while we still have some energy in our tanks. I volunteer myself.
We should discuss it,
Greg said.
About who should go downstairs, if that's what we're gonna do.
Out of the 4 of us, I said, I might be the best person with that unicorn. It would have been Sally, but she's not here. You're worried about it attacking us again when we go back through? Patrick said. It's not that, I said. I did my best to smile. I'm thinking about writing it. Naturally, my friends protested, something along the lines of I must have a death wish. But I reasoned with them about how that unicorn could help us. As long as I wasn't running myself, the entity should only walk when they tried to get me after I left the puzzle area for the cell phone. That's what I would be counting on anyway. I also wanted to see if I could count on that unicorn carrying me faster than I could walk. There was nothing in the rules about riding a horse or a unicorn at running speed. I more or less won them over about the idea, though we had to take a vote. Greg voted against it. The majority ruled in favor. After we had what we hoped was a working solution to the final puzzle, a puzzle had gotten us thinking about the other puzzles in the house and how the rules applied to them. I got myself ready mentally, or tried to. The others patted me on the back, gave me the whole "you got this" spiel. Even Greg was warming up to the idea of cracking jokes about virgins and unicorns. I figured I might not have this, but at any rate, at least I go down with a bang, riding the back of a zombie unicorn until I was yanked off by the entities. The others got ready too, in case I had to hurl the cell phone the final distance through the railway if I didn't put the cell phone in the cart. They'd have to quickly put it down in the nook, where we hoped there was something it could attach to where the key was lodged. The plan was to take out the battery right after. If that failed to get the entities off our backs, they'd take apart more of the phone, or just try to break it. Like we had before entering that house and before starting some of the puzzles, we did our whole counting thing. Eyes open this time. Then I pulled the key out. It didn't take long for someone to fish down into the bottom of the nook. There was a small hole where the key had been lodged. Inside it was a wire head. It didn't look like any kind of wire head we were used to though. Tiny symbols were engraved in the metal prong. You had to get really close to make them out. Gold spiraling out of a treasure chest, a stairway, and more. Each symbol seemed to represent one of our previous puzzles. It may not have looked like something that would ordinarily be plugged into a cell phone, but it seemed the right size. And that, along with these symbols, made us more confident in the plan. Pocketing the silver key, I nodded to the others, then headed out of the room as quickly as I could without running. We still didn't know whether the puzzles were timed once started. Thankfully, the blade traps didn't activate when I took the railway cart back. It wasn't something I could relax about yet though, because I thought I'd probably have to face them again when returning to the puzzle room. The other silver key worked. It unlocked the unicorn's bedroom door. When I went in, the unicorn was waiting for me a few feet from the entryway, like it had heard me coming back. I tried not to pay attention to the maggots, rotting flesh, and exposed inner parts. I also tried not to think about the unicorn pulverizing me with its hooves or that broken horn it had. "Well, hello again, Unitorn," I said. "Alright if I call you Unitorn? You know, torn instead of corn because of how your body's all torn up? Get it?" It stared at me with its huge dark eyes. One of those eyes bulged and sagged slightly more than the other. Its broken horn was lowered, but I was hoping that was more in pacification than intent to strike. "How about, Pete?" I said. "Maybe that's a little better. Pete the Unicorn. Pete, if you help us by giving me a little ride up and down the stairs, we'll do all we can to get you out of this house. I promise. Sound like a deal?" It neighed, shaking off jiggling white maggots and pieces of hair and flesh. "Okay," I said. "Maybe that means you understand, or maybe that was a coincidence. Either way, I'm going to try to get on you in a moment. Please don't kill me." I approached the creature and gave it some pats, which it tolerated. There may have been a saddle somewhere in that opulent bedroom, in one of the many fancy drawers of the nightstand or mirror dresser, for example. There might have been one in the closet. I did not spend time searching for a saddle, however, because I didn't know how much time we had after removing the key, and because I wasn't sure how to properly saddle a horse or unicorn to begin with. I also remembered something Sally had told me when we were kids. Something about riding a horse without a saddle. She said it was possible, it was just harder. You had to really get a good grip on the horse's mane. I was hoping, with the state that unicorn was in, that its mane would not completely pull away as I was riding. My hand on the unicorn's cold, damp back, I got ready to leap onto it. I had no idea how successful I'd be without using a stirrup for my feet. I figured I'd have to do some climbing. But as I was tensing to jump, the unicorn, surprisingly enough, knelt down for me. Thanking Pete the unicorn while being bewildered he had done that, I climbed on. Then he stood again. I gripped his mane. I could tell that some of the hairs were better attached than others. In any case, when I tried to get the unicorn to turn, I leaned with my body and used the grip of my legs rather than pulling on the mane. I'm not sure if that's the way you're supposed to do it, but like I said, I was worried about the rest of its hair coming out. That unicorn was a rotting carcass after all. As quickly as I could, I got the basic idea of how to use the pressure of my legs to ask the unicorn to change its speed. Some of that was remembering the horse riding we'd done with Sally years ago. It was strange how the unicorn responded as well as a trained horse would. Despite the unicorn working with me, already I was experiencing some pain while riding it, and it seemed like its bones were jabbing into me much more than a normal horse's would. I wondered if it could feel pain too, like the dead or dying plants on the front porch. I figured it had never been alive to begin with. Either way, I had no wish to cause it any more harm than what it might already be suffering by simply existing. Pete the unicorn and I had to get downstairs. We had to grab the cell phone and come back up without getting nabbed by the entities. I wasn't sure whether they would harm the unicorn. For that matter, I couldn't be sure if it would try to work with them and give me over to them as soon as they appeared. Speaking of the entities, they hadn't come for me yet. Or maybe fleeing the puzzle was related to the floor or related to the entire house. I rode the unicorn over to the other of its bedroom doors, the one that didn't need a key. I leaned down and opened it. As I rode Pete into the first of the doll bedrooms, I was thankful that Greg had decided to spring that trap here earlier. I nevertheless kept our distance from that skeleton with the doll's head that had some of Sally's features. It was not long after we got to the stairs that the entities made an appearance. They were near the bottom, and some of them were already on their way up. The smaller bodies where heads should be gazed up at me from where they reclined. I had something like an epiphany of dread, of how those things might run despite the crooked limbs and the robes of the larger bodies. The smaller bodies fused to the top of them seemed much more efficiently structured and muscled. If they could somehow detach themselves from the larger bodies, they might move very fast, even faster than a person could. Maybe they would detach themselves once you started running. I didn't want to find out, but I had to risk galloping the unicorn to see if it fell under the same rules as us. There was no way I alone could dodge all of those entities. Were there 6 or 7? While navigating the stairs at the same time. "Here we go, Pete," I said. "We got to run past those things coming up the stairs. We got to get to the front door." I tried to use the pressure of my legs as well as a hee-ah for the dramatic effect. The undead unicorn rocketed forward. My head snapped back. My hands, which had been shaking, nearly lost their grip. Pete went down the stairs so quickly that I barely had time to react to what was happening. On the 3rd floor landing, a large, many-fingered hand reached out from the side. It nearly snatched me off Pete's back. I guess one entity had already been on the 3rd floor landing, waiting for us. Most of the others were coming upstairs with their strange, methodical dance-like rhythm. Neither they nor the smaller bodies fused at the top of them were running. That was a relief. I didn't see Walt when I glanced above, though I hadn't broken the rule about going upstairs before solving a puzzle. I was pretty sure Walt the Stairman was up there somewhere watching, wedged crazily into the top of the stairway with his crooked limbs. Walt's brethren were threat enough. I felt a scream rising in my throat as I realized that there wasn't enough room to get around the entities on the stairs. We had to go through them. I wasn't sure what they were made of. I wasn't sure how strong they were. If it came down to playing chicken, I didn't know which side would be the larger car. But that unicorn skipped the last flight of stairs entirely. It leapt over the railing. I braced myself for impact. When we slammed down on the 1st floor, my teeth clacked together in my mouth. I tasted blood. I've got a chipped tooth from that incident. But at the time, I was just thankful we made it beyond the entities, and I was more concerned that the impact would have devastating consequences for that rotting unicorn carcass I was riding. Pete held up though. I'm pretty sure he lost some of his mass, but he held up. Pete trotted up to the front door. I leaned from the unicorn's back, wishing again I had the time and know-how to search for and put on a saddle, and I reached as far as I could into the cubbyhole until I got my hand on the cell phone. I turned the unicorn around to find an entity just a few feet away. Its smaller body had completely unfurled on the mound where the larger body's head should be. The smaller body unveiled those blade-covered upper arms. Because the entities had only been walking upstairs, it made them closer to me now than if they had been running. The ones that had been in the rear of that procession were especially close. I figured Pete couldn't pull the same magic twice, not while going upstairs. I figured we'd have to clear those entities from the stairway, so I tried leading them away by going away from the stairs.
I rolled Pete throughout the rooms of the first floor. They did follow, but they did something weird. They all got into the parlor, the room next to the foyer and stairs, and would not move beyond it. It was the room with that clown etched into the top of a cabinet and the Mona Lisa George Washington melted face portrait that had holes for eyes. The 6 or 7 entities gathered there. I have trouble remembering even how many gathered in that parlor. Maybe it had something to do with the distortion of air around them, like foggy glass in a mirror. At the edges of the room, they did an obscene little dance with their crooked limbs. The smaller bodies on the top of them joined in. It was as if a group of psychotic cultists combined the random stuff you see in a modern dance club with some kind of ceremonial waltz, then added a dash of their own esoteric flair. Reverent or irreverent at the same time, the crooked limbs of the larger bodies and the handless bladed arms of the upper bodies didn't help make it any less unpleasant. At the culmination of this strange dance, they all turned in my direction and waited. I was outside of the parlor at this point, looking in from the kitchen. What could I do but ride the unicorn at a gallop through the ring of them? That's what I did. I had to get back to my friends. If I had been part of some ritual those entities had been doing in the parlor, I didn't want to think about it. I galloped Pete up the stairs into his bedroom. I gave him some pettings, assured him again that we'd try our best to get him out. The entities, for all I could tell, had no longer been chasing me. The weird dance of theirs had signaled the end of their pursuit after I'd broken a couple of rules. I had no idea what it meant, but it did seem to tell me a couple of things. One of which, they probably weren't dumb enough to have been led by me from the stairs without them realizing what I was doing. The other, they had made their own motives beyond the rules we made that were foreign to me, probably foreign to all of us. Had we created them, or had they been created by the house that we created? The entities themselves were one of those things, like the finer details of many of the house's objects and like the puzzles that we had left vague. Like the house had seemed to have done when it filled in those details. I suppose the house was filling in the details about the entities, but if the house had done so, it was almost like it had created something of its own. I thought maybe the house was making some kind of play at symbolism. The entities had those larger bodies with the smaller ones fused on, like adulthood fused to childhood, or vice versa. I had no idea what it might have been trying to accomplish in that, or what the house or the entities could want beyond scaring and hurting whoever went inside. Those were 2 motives we had worked into the house's designs when we were children. Having left the unicorn behind in that bedroom, I went through the trap, the cart with the quills and the pendulum blades. Again, I was feeling alone at first. Soon though, I heard my friends beyond the railway. After nearly getting my head sliced through by one of those pendulums, and then nearly getting hit again by some of those quills, I figured out the prime number sequence for my second trip in the cart. Even with some near misses, I got out without a scratch the second time. The blood from that cut on my leg from the first time was still wet, a reminder of what could have happened or worse. My friends greeted me on the other side. I told them Pete the Unicorn, yes, we're calling him Pete now. No, he seems to like the name, had done admirably, as well as any unicorn from myth might do. They asked me where the entities were. I told them about that ritualistic jig the entities had done in the parlor after I'd gotten the cell phone and had tried to lead them away from the stairs. A real hoedown that. My friends weren't amused. They kept looking past me, over their shoulders, up at the ceiling, in the corners of the hall and puzzle room, everywhere, as if the entities might ambush us at any moment. Maybe breaking 2 rules cancels those rules out, Patrick said. I don't think it's that simple, Greg said. It would be in the rules if it was that way. We didn't have much time to talk about it. We didn't know how much time we had after removing the silver key from the nook in the table. I went over and pulled up the wire lead and plugged it into the cell phone. I think it was Jennifer's cell phone though. I'm not certain if that really matters. The bright lights of the room flickered before going completely out. I think I had expected a little wooden attic stairway or something to snap free of the ceiling. You know, a typical way for people to access the attic. But when those bright lights shut completely off, a door slid across the entryway and put us in pitch blackness. Needless to say, it was a big contrast to the lighting earlier. Then, the entire room began to move, like an elevator, except I didn't know if it was going up, down, left, or right. We didn't say anything, but all of us got closer to each other, and just as wordlessly, we got back to back. We tensed up. I don't know who had started it first, or if we had all started getting into that defensive arrangement at once. It reminded me in a way of the unstated reason why we had been trying to finish the haunted house as kids after Sally was gone. Without saying as much, we all thought it might help to bring her back, if we had to deal with something else that the house threw at us, here or in the attic, something we had not designed, but that the house was filling in the details for. Whatever it was would have to deal with the four of us. The fifth floor puzzle had been solved. As that entire puzzle room moved, we readied ourselves in darkness and silence, carrying the unspoken bonds of our childhood friendship as a light. The attic and the treasure had to be next. Finale. The attic. The treasure. The puzzle room stopped moving. The lights came back on. They were as dazzlingly bright as before. The cell phone was still in its place on the table, hooked into the charging station-like device that had been activated to solve the fifth puzzle. Though the room had stopped moving, the door did not open. The cell phone rang. No number. Jennifer walked over, answered the call, and put it on speakerphone. The voice that came out of the phone was strange, different than I thought an ordinary human voice capable of. It had a baroque quality with additional sounds coming from the words themselves, like an ethereal growl or other noises, like static that spiraled outward with its own mysterious meanings. It was at once soothing, mystifying, and alarming. "Congratulations," the voice on the phone said. "No one has ever gotten this far. The others perished, but what less can be expected? You have created. You will create. You create. Nonetheless, congratulations are in order. You risked and you won. Now, step forward and claim the treasure." The call on the phone ended. The door opened. That call shook us, but we were not to be deterred. Not this close to the treasure. We walked into a hallway that would have been dark if not for the spillover from the bright puzzle room. There was an old but solid-looking wooden door at the end of the hallway. When Patrick put his hands on the doorknob and asked us if we were ready, it reminded me of when we'd gotten ready to enter the front door of that house. But there was no knocker this time. No rules we had to follow in order to enter. Patrick opened the door. We got a glimpse of a typical-looking medium-sized attic lit by a single light bulb. It had stuff like dusty clothing piled high, broken TVs and other electronics, and an assortment of chests and other storage containers. Some blood-covered old Legos had spilled out on one of the plastic storage bins. Mannequins stood in shadows, wearing dark clothing that made them more difficult to see. I knew we had put some of that in the attic in our designs as kids, but I wasn't sure how much. There was a closet door I didn't remember putting in. Towards the back of the attic, there was a long, coffin-sized chest that stood out. It was like an amalgamation of a coffin and a treasure chest. Its outside was etched and gilded like a treasure chest, with a touch of the Gothic. It was a treasure chest we might have imagined in a haunted house as kids. On the other hand, it had the more somber dimensions of an expensive coffin. As with the puzzles, we had simply circled this particular area in our sketchbook designs and written in the word treasure. For all we thought we knew back then, the treasure could have been piled high in the attic outside of a container, like all that old clothing. That chest had no lock or a place for a lock on it, but it did have latches. One of us unlatched it, and together we pulled it open. Inside was a woman with long blonde hair grown past her waist, hair that seemed like curls of gold in that light. Her facial features were a little different than I expected, but more and more reminded me of Sally. She was very frail, her skin was intact, and her body was moving up and down. She was breathing. Her eyelids twitched, began to open. Although she was right there in front of us, we called out to her as if she was on the other side of a river. It was Sally.
She wasn't dead. Sally was alive. At some point, not long after we opened the chest, Greg went up and closed it, and he closed the latches. He did all that with one hand, his other holding his sketchbook and pencil together. When Greg stepped away, all we could do at first was gawk at him. The way Greg stared back at us, his pencil in one hand and the sketchbook in the other, recalled to me that the strange look he had on his face when we'd said for the first time aloud that Sally could be the treasure, when we said that here as adults on the first floor of this haunted house we had imagined as kids. The little closet door in the attic opened. I heard it and had to turn my head to see. One thing after another came rushing out of the closet from a hunched position. The Frankenstein's monster that had parts of each of us, the butler mannequin and the demon doll. As far as I can tell, modifications had been made to everything but the Frankenstein thing. They were more powerful and lifelike than the versions we'd seen before, and weirder. Instead of the butler becoming a real man, for example, its skin was some fusion between real skin and the artificial skin of mannequins. As they left that closet, they sprinted past Greg and grabbed the other three of us. The demon doll was the same size as before, already having been life-sized, but now much stronger and sturdier than what a doll would be. It came at me and wrestled me into a grip I could not escape from. It didn't help that I was exhausted from everything else in the house. Patrick and Jennifer suffered similarly with the Frankenstein thing and the butler. That Frankenstein's monster with parts of each of us was weeping and grinding its teeth behind Jennifer's neck while it gripped her around her body. It was weeping out of one eye that was Sally's and another that might have been Greg's. I did all I could to try and escape that demon's grip, but it was as if that surge of my strength worked against me, like it got gobbled up by the greater force. It was being held by a strength that was as unreal as the Frankenstein thing's grip that we had to contend with on the third floor, and it seemed like I could feel its sharp teeth and horns behind me, just from its breathing on my neck. It put my struggles to bed like an adult would do a child. That made me angry, so I gritted my teeth and tried once more. Again, it handled me like I was small. I expended so much energy that it began to feel like it was the demon that was keeping me from falling. "Don't hurt my friends," Greg said. He opened his sketchbook, flipped through and wrote something down there. "There, now you can't hurt them." "Greg," Jennifer said as the Frankenstein thing wept and drooled on her shoulder while it held her. "What's going on?" "Something that hurts me very much," Greg said. "I never wanted to do it to Sally." He was tearing up, almost as much as the Frankenstein thing. "I'm sorry. I wish things hadn't gone the way they had. When I told Sally about my power and then showed her, and she insisted that she tell all of you, even though I warned her. When all of that happened, I freaked out. I had to put her to sleep. While we were finishing the house, I was hoping I'd think of a way to make her forget." "What are you talking about?" Patrick said. "Why did you have to put her to sleep?"
"Because she knew, and she was going to tell the rest of you. And one or all of you might have told others. The power I have makes me a threat to other people. That's my white elephant, the gift I never wanted. Remember what my aunt did to that hamster of mine because it was a threat to her? A harmless little thing like that? Now imagine what the rest of the world would do to someone that could make things real by drawing them. Once drawn, I can modify those things by making changes to the drawings or by making notations on them."
"You did all this?" I said.
"We did all this," Greg said. "Sally and I had a special bond, but the rest of you also mean a whole lot to me. I would never hurt you. This house might have hurt us, but it was important that I left in the dangers we'd all planned and that I left some things for the house to fill in as it tried to frighten or harm us. I was hoping I could prove how much you mean to me. I risked my life here, just like the rest of you. I didn't have to. I left the puzzles blank so that I wouldn't have the answers. Let the house make them, I thought. I didn't have to do that either. You helped me create this. Anything you drew or wrote here, I went over with care and respect with my own pencil. We did this together, The house and its rules? They're ours.
As Greg was talking, I realized something. Earlier in the house, when Greg had been on stage with that puppet in the ballroom, I flipped through Greg's new sketchbook. I hadn't realized it then, but I never saw the rules that he supposedly written down from memory. "Where are the old sketchbooks, Greg?" I said. He gave me a pained smile.
"You've been asking that a lot," he said. "I'm sorry I had to lie to you before."
Greg opened his new sketchbook and wrote something down. Then the book changed. It yellowed and became slightly withered.
"All of those old designs are here with me, with us,"
he said.
"Right after we had finished or completed, whatever you want to call it, our haunted house as kids, and some of us were beginning to move out of that apartment complex. I transcribed everything in smaller size from those other sketchbooks to one sketchbook. That was to simplify things and ensure that at the end of the day, everything was in my hand. I didn't want to risk something we'd drawn into the previous sketchbooks not taking root and becoming because I had forgotten to trace over it myself. I also wanted to create a sketchbook with my power to use as the sketchbook, so I had more control over it. This is the master sketchbook."
"Did you change anything we created?" I said.
"Yes,"
Greg said.
"But I was as faithful to our original designs as I could be."
"You weren't faithful to us,"
Jennifer said.
"You deprived Sally of her life."
"I know,"
Greg said.
"And I'm sorry, but she's safe here. She's protected by the dangers and puzzles in this house. Dangers and puzzles that no one else could survive. And that's if they even made it to the house. This entire neighborhood is a farce. If you were to go inside the other houses, you would find them furnished with signs of people living there. But if you waited, no one would come home. I drew and annotated the neighborhood to be cut off from the rest of the world. And the only times I opened it up, other than to visit it myself, was to feed the house with other people. Once opened and with the right incitements, mostly through online posts, some folks just get an experience they never forgot. Whether or not they actually forgot doesn't matter. The house kills and eats them."
"You let other people die here?" Patrick said. "Worse," I said. "He lured them here."
"I warned them,"
Greg said.
"I let them know that they would be risking their lives. I gave them the rules and all that. There was no fine print. The only things I didn't tell them was that my friends and I designed the haunted house and that my power brought it to life."
"But they didn't know it was really haunted and really dangerous,"
Jennifer said.
"We didn't think it was real even when it showed up exactly as we'd drawn it as kids. We thought it was a prank one of us put on. Greg, how many people have you led here to die?"
"Look,"
Greg said.
"I know how it sounds, and it's as bad as it sounds. Probably worse when you get down to the finer details of me having to set up surveillance equipment outside and dutifully feeding this thing like some zoo animal. But there's no other way. Believe me, I tried. Dead animals, dug up corpses. I had to work my way up to live humans through trial and error. When I don't feed the house, it starts to fall apart. And Sally gets sick. It might need live humans because of how we designed it to be both scary and dangerous."
"You could have changed that," Patrick said. "You could have made it not scary and dangerous. You could have had it feed on flowers or sunshine or something." Greg shook his head.
"It's not that easy. If you give someone godlike power without giving them godlike knowledge, they can't just make up whatever changes they want willy-nilly and hope the results won't be disastrous. What if Sally died because of some big change I made? And trust me, altering the diet of this house would be a big change. I never wanted this power. I never asked for it. The only times I loved using it was when we made this house together. I rarely use it these days.
other than for maintenance, keeping Sally safe and keeping my own head from being lopped off by the rest of the human race. I'm glad you all haven't tried to tell me that you'll keep my secret if I just let you go. Sally tried to do that in the end. Changed her tune. Said she wouldn't tell anyone. Obviously, I knew she was lying. That hurt me worse because it made me feel like I was some kind of kidnapper or killer. It broke my heart.
Whatever you plan on doing with us, I said, replan it and let all of us, including Sally, leave this house. You said earlier you told some friends you'd be here. Yeah, right. But I really told some people I'd be here. Now those other friends of mine might not come rushing up at 3 a.m., but they'll begin to wonder why I haven't come back the next day.
Did you not hear me?
Greg said.
About how this entire neighborhood is cut off from the world unless I want it to be open? The only reason I can think of that Patrick found it has to be because the neighborhood was open for the house's feeding session. Imagine that. What are the odds, right? I guess I'm to blame for making the access point somewhere in our hometown, but that made it easier for me not to have to travel far away when I have to go to the access points in person. Others who were not on the house's menu have driven through before. If they ever stopped at the house, they'd never go inside, unless they were the thrill or paranormal seekers who found out about it online that I'd purposely let inside the neighborhood. Only reason I made 2 access points is because I thought it would make them feel safer before they were eaten. And the only reason I opened the way in again for us after Patrick found it was because I had this idea. Well, it's an idea I've had for a while, but one that's been sped up. After I had to put Sally here when we were younger, by and by I began to think, wouldn't it be great if the rest of us could stay here with her? Greg, you need someone to talk to,
Jennifer said.
Someone outside of us. Your head's not in the right place, but anybody can get like that. It's not your fault. It has to be that power that's to blame. I need help, right?
Greg said.
No. I'm thinking very clearly and logically about my survival. About all our survival. I don't need to stand here and tell you how nasty a place the rest of the world is. I don't need to tell you how we're giving sets of rules all the time and we're expected to follow while others are breaking them, often at our expense. The world is a nasty place. This house might be scary and dangerous. We designed it that way. But at least rules mean something here. When the rest of the world goes to hell, we can all be sleeping here, dreaming forever, together. I haven't figured it out yet how the neighborhood could open and close of its own accord to let others in when it has to feed. I don't yet know how it could monitor itself so that it won't be discovered in the wrong kind of way, but I'm working on those things. I'll be working on them as the rest of you sleep. I'll plan on having a solution by the time I'm old and gray and ready to join you. So we can all dream forever. We could be immortal here. Sally got older, but I don't think she'll ever really die in that chest. There are some other things about this house I need to work on, like the liberties it sometimes takes. Filling in the details is one thing, but it wasn't me who put Sally's voice in there singing to us from the 4th floor ballroom. And I know that wasn't something we had planned when we were kids and that I'd gone over later with my own pencil. Also, I wasn't to blame for that.
As Greg was giving more examples, a strange voice whispered to me, "Get the sketchbook." It took a second or two for me to realize that it had been the demon that was holding me. I also just realized that its grip had relaxed. "The annotations around my body in the sketchbook," the demon said. "They do not state how long to hold you for." I didn't waste any time mentally debating whether or not to trust a demon. I didn't have time for that if I was going to stop Greg. It was one of those moments when you're completely exhausted, then you tap into those reserves you didn't know were there. I was given an opening, and I took it. To get around the rule about running,
I bounded forward as quickly as possible. There was nothing in the rules about jumping. Greg had seen me and was fast at work in that sketchbook of his. But I was on him in 2 bounds. I tore the pencil out of his hand as he was still drawing or writing. I thrust it in my own pocket, and then I punched him in the face harder than I thought I could do, given how tired I was. Greg fell. I pulled the sketchbook out of his loosened hands. I'm not sure if that knocked him out, or if it was what Patrick did next. Patrick dove on him and then proceeded to strike Greg while on top of him.
"Get off him, Patrick,"
Jennifer said.
"Give me a turn."
"I can't get up," Patrick said. I looked around for the Frankenstein thing, the demon and the butler. They were gone. I suppose they left the same way they had gotten here, by that small attic closet. Or maybe they were on the way to the puzzle room turned elevator. "Guys," I said when I turned back around, "we can't just kill him." "Why not?" Patrick said. "He took Sally's life away from her." Patrick was having trouble breathing. I couldn't tell whether Greg was still breathing. "Sally's still alive," I said, "and right now we need to help her."
"Yeah,"
Jennifer said.
"we should do that instead of killing Greg."
I hauled Patrick up. Greg seemed to be unconscious, but still breathing. Jennifer sighed as we stood over him.
"How can we just turn him over to the cops for kidnapping Sally? As soon as he gets his hands on something to write on, I'm guessing we'll all be in big trouble. Cops won't believe us if we try to tell them the truth. We might get them to believe us about the kidnapping part, but not about the other stuff."
"We've got to show them the house," I said. "Until then, I think Greg should stay here, where Sally has been staying. I'm guessing this house pumps oxygen and nutrients into that chest she's in. I'm guessing."
"Let's get Sally,"
Jennifer said. We unlatched the chest again, opened it up. Sally's eyes had closed once more. It seemed something in the chest, maybe some chemical or other agent being pumped in along with the oxygen, put whoever was inside it asleep as soon as it was closed. When she opened her eyes again, it was like witnessing a miracle twice. "Sally?" I said. "We're here for you," Patrick said.
"We'll get you going, Sally,"
Jennifer said.
"I don't know what you remember, but Greg, is he here?"
Sally said weakly. Her face was very pale, but I couldn't tell if that was from mentioning Greg or from the state she was in. She was frail, likely in no small part due to her muscles withering from all that time in that treasure chest. To add to that, I wasn't sure how good the nutrients the house had been giving her were. "Greg's out cold," I said. I had a jolt of fear as I realized none of us were paying attention to Greg at that moment. Then I turned around. He was still there, still seemed to be unconscious. Thank goodness. But we were quick and careful to get Sally out. We put Greg back into the chest where Sally had been with less gentleness, and we closed the latches. None of us wanted to give him a chance to wake up and get a hold of a pencil and sketchbook again. We took the sketchbook Greg had been holding and put it in my waistband, as Greg had done when going through the house's crazier parts. I carried Sally, who was very light, while Jennifer propped up Patrick. We went back to the puzzle room. When we took the cell phone out of the nook on the table and unplugged it from the cord, the lights went out again. The room moved back to the 5th floor. We did not have to experience the blade trap again on the 5th floor railway. As I've mentioned, it doesn't activate when you're coming back. We spent some time with Pete the unicorn. During that time, Sally reached out from my arms to pet him. She said we had to remove the unicorn from the house, that it didn't belong here, that it never had, and we said how he had already determined to do so. I had a promise to keep to that unicorn, but right then we had to get her and Patrick to a hospital, and we'd have to come back with a horse trailer or something. There was no way we could fit Pete into our car. As I carried Sally down the stairs while Jennifer helped Patrick, Sally was as light as a dream. She looked as tired as the rest of us felt, but she seemed none too eager to fall back asleep. I don't blame her. From the cubbyhole near the front door, we got the rest of our cell phones and the keys that had electronics on them. 4 of us had entered the haunted house we made up as kids. 4 of us left. We had replaced Greg with Sally. It was about 5 a.m. Nearly 12 hours had passed since we'd gone into that house. It had seemed like much longer. We got in the car we had come in and drove straight to the nearest hospital. When we checked Sally and Patrick into the hospital,
We'd said they'd been the victims of a kidnapping and some traps had been set by the kidnapper. That was basically true. At the time of this writing, a little over 3 weeks have passed since we went into that house and since Sally and Patrick were hospitalized. Patrick did have some broken ribs, but those are already healing up nicely. His other injuries are muscle related and should heal even more quickly. He's been out of the hospital for a while. Sally's health issues are more complicated. She had been lying down and, as far as we could tell, asleep for over 10 years in that house. Many of her health issues are similar to someone who has been in a coma for a long time. Her muscles and bones, for example, are so weak and atrophied that she has to work constantly with doctors and physical therapists to try to get them better. We're not sure if they'll ever be completely better. We don't know if she'll ever be able to walk again. We visit her all the time. She missed a lot of time, but she's the same Sally we knew. At least one of us is always there visiting when we can, filling her in on the kinds of things we missed while she was asleep into adulthood. Sometimes it seems like she's the one visiting us when we see her, like she's the one comforting us. She finds ways to make us laugh when we start to get sad about what she experienced, and about what she didn't experience. She was able to find levity in the darkest of things, even in her own captivity in a coffin-like chest. It reminds me of how she had come up with the idea of designing the haunted house, probably to make us feel better about being so cooped up as apartment brats. It's unfortunate that her idea of an escape had a reaction with Greg's personality and power. In a way, it might have been a good thing that she had been asleep, and opposed to her having been awake the entire time in that chest. The police reports have also been very complicated, mainly because we're not able to find our way back to that neighborhood with the house in it. Jennifer and I even put pins down on our GPS as soon as we were leaving, so that we could come back and check on it directly after dropping Sally and Patrick off at the hospital. We were mostly concerned about someone else going into that neighborhood and, for whatever reason, trying to get into the house. As far as we could tell, Greg had left the path into that neighborhood open even after we'd walked inside the house. How else could we have gone out of it? But when we tried to go back, the neighborhood was gone. There was some woods in its place. As much as we searched those woods, we could not find the house. So what were we supposed to tell the police without evidence? The four of us agreed on what our story would be in the meantime. We figured as long as Sally was telling the same story as us, we might look innocent of having anything to do with her disappearance all those years. But it seems that people are getting more and more suspicious. Our stories, while in sync, are too vague. And there's the matter of Greg, who disappeared in her place. Here's basically what we've been telling the authorities and Sally's loved ones alike. Jennifer, Patrick, Greg, and I all got an anonymous tip, a letter in the mail directing us to a house and promising us that our childhood friend Sally was there. The letter told us we had to bring our letters to the house and burn them in a fireplace in order to see our friend. We had to come alone. We think this meshed directly with the general kinds of stuff we had told others before going. We did as the letter instructed, following step-by-step directions to a house where we expected someone to come out and meet us with further terms, or else try to kill us. But when no one came out to do either after we had burned our letters, we decided to explore the house. We found traps, which is how we got cut and injured, and we found our childhood friend Sally in a comatose state. Greg disappeared while we were in that house. We'd gotten separated at some point. We don't know where he is. We can't give details about the kidnapper or kidnappers because we never saw them. At the time, we had been so concerned about getting Sally and Patrick to the hospital that we hadn't made the point of remembering the address. The location wasn't saved in our GPS either because we had been going by step-by-step directions to the house. That's the kind of report we've been giving. Obviously, there are some truths in there and also plenty of lies and omissions. We hope it will suffice until we can get back to that house and bring the police with us. Otherwise, not going to believe a word we say. We set up our own hidden cameras outside where the road leading through the neighborhood should be. As we were doing so, we found a couple of Greg's secret cameras and took them out. Whereas he had been trying to lead people into that neighborhood for the house to feed on, we were hoping to notice if and when the way opened up again. We had 4 things in mind mainly: to prevent the house from feeding, to get the police to go there with us, to get Greg into their hands with a promise that they won't let him anywhere near drawing or writing materials, and to get that unicorn out. We hoped to get the unicorn out before we went to the police, because we were pretty concerned about what might happen to that unicorn if the police knew about it. We'll probably never forgive Greg. We probably never should. but we mostly agree that he should not suffer the fate as Sally did all those years, even though that would be one of those cases of the punishment fitting the crime. Patrick says to let him rot. I don't know for sure if the way to the house will ever open up again. Maybe the house is responsible for closing the path. Maybe it was something Greg had done before we got in him, where you could go out of the neighborhood, but you couldn't come back. It could also be that Greg somehow woke up, got out of that latched chest and closed the path off himself. We're constantly monitoring those cameras we set up near where the neighborhood should be. When or if it opens up again, we'll be ready. But something happened recently that has led me to believe that this might not only have been us that left that house in its neighborhood. Two somethings if you can count the second incident. The first that happened was a couple of days ago. I've got a small house with some woods behind it. My whole street has got woods behind it. I tend to have a lot of backyard visitors, everything from stray cats to deer. When I heard something making a lot of racket on the back porch a little after 3 a.m., my initial thought was, big old cat looking for food, probably knocked something over. Then as I woke up and went over to the back door, I felt sure it was a deer because it was too big. It started pawing at the door, so I got a rake from the garage, came back and opened the door. It was Pete the unicorn. That rotting, maggot-infested son of a myth. I'm not sure how he got my address. Some animals are exceptionally good at tracking, but I can't say for sure about an animal that has never existed to begin with. However it got to my house, I quickly brought it inside. I didn't want any of the neighbors to see. When I think about what could happen to that unicorn, it reminds me of Greg and all those fears he has of other people seeing him as a threat. That's kind of related to that hamster of his too, I guess. Whatever the world might have done to Greg before they had learned about his power now because of what he's done to us and what he might do to others, things are going to be a whole lot worse for him when they find out. Is it crazy that I feel bad for him and hate him at the same time? But the unicorn is not Greg. I don't think it would harm anyone, if it could help it. Yeah, it broke some of Patrick's ribs, but I blame that more on the house and on Greg. With a better living situation, who knows? Is it living situation or unliving situation for something that's undead? I moved my truck and just about everything else out of my garage to make a spot for Pete. He has some hay and a little bit of space to move around in, until we can get a better location for him, that is. I've told the others that he came to my house and is temporarily living in my garage. Patrick and Jennifer have already been over to see for themselves. I think Sally wants to keep the unicorn herself once her health improves. Maybe we can pool our resources and find a secluded piece of land somewhere for it to live on. I'm still trying to figure out what an undead unicorn eats. For that matter, I don't know what a living unicorn might eat since, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any. I keep trying different kinds of horse food, but with no success. The other thing that happened more recently wasn't good. I'm not sure if it really happened or if it was my eyes and imagination playing tricks on me. Early this morning, I was out on my back porch eating breakfast as I like to do. I had been thinking about what I was going to try to feed Pete next time around and whether he needed some toys or something when I saw the leaves on a nearby tree move in a way that spooked me. It was like something was in those leaves moving them, but as like something wasn't there. You know, invisible. I could have sworn I saw a shape. It was tall, small up top and large on the bottom, and its outline reminded me of those entities. Then, whether it was due to a breeze or something actually in there, it moved away from the tree until I could no longer see that shape. I don't remember the wind blowing when it happened. But probably it was a breeze. Probably I'm just freaked out by the whole experience in that house. Having the unicorn show up in my back doorstep is one thing, but having the entities leave that house and seeking me out where I live, that's not going to work for me. I've still got some questions about the entities. Questions I mean to ask Greg when we go back and wake him up. Either way, it's got me thinking. If things like the unicorn are finding a way out of the house and the hidden neighborhood it's in, we should be able to go back. In the meantime, we have Greg's master sketchbook. It's the composite of all those sketchbooks we'd made as kids, but with Greg's changes and additions. Jennifer, Patrick, Sally, and I are still going through it. With it, we unearth new memories and mysteries just about every day. It's a lot different than going through the house in person,
fearing for your life when things are so frantic you can barely think straight half the time. I don't know how we solved those puzzles. In the master sketchbook, we found the neighborhood Greg had designed himself in order to hide the house. We tried erasing what we think is the closed-off path. It did not work. We also discovered an 8th rule in the master sketchbook. It was a rule that Greg added to the other 7. One that he didn't tell us about. I can only think that after all that talk about risking his life along with the rest of us, it was some kind of protection he'd planned in case those things went south with the entities. The 8th rule states that if 2 rules are broken at once, they will cancel each other out. Patrick was right. Seems Greg was trying to shoot that idea down as being too simple in order to throw us off. I suppose that now I know why the entity stopped chasing me after I broke 2 rules at the same time while trying to solve the 5th puzzle. But it still does not explain that bizarre ritualistic dance the entities did in the parlor after I'd broken them. I think there's a weird kind of loop or cyclical symmetry to us imagining the house waiting there for us, similar to how we imagined it years ago as children, but with real and recent memories pinning it down as vividly as anything else we have experienced. We'll continue to be vigilant and thorough with our camera monitoring and with Greg's master sketchbook. If the house has gotten control over the way into its neighborhood, maybe due to some loophole or liberty it has taken outside of Greg's designs, it can only wait for so long with the paths closed off before it starts to get hungry. Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining me tonight to conclude this series. Special thanks to the author, Victor Sweetser, aka Rick the Intern, for allowing me to narrate this great masterpiece. Also, apologies because it took me so long to wrap this series up, but I had some personal real-life issues to take care of. Also, it was my birthday this week, so I had to take a little time for myself as well. But we're going to pick the pace back up next week, guaranteed. So, if you did enjoy this story, please remember to leave a like, comment, and share it with your friends. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, I'll be seeing you